On April 23rd, 2013, an 11-minute cartoon aired on Cartoon Network about 5 superheroes assembling a sandwich. Not saving the world, not confronting an ancient evil, a sandwich. The episode was called Legendary Sandwich, and it was the debut of Teen Titans Go, a show that would go on to produce over 440 episodes across 9 seasons, becoming the longest-running program in Cartoon Network history. But here's the thing about that very first episode. The quest structure it used, the joke of turning a mundane errand into an epic adventure, had already been done dozens of times across animation. And that pattern, the quiet borrowing of what already existed and repackaging it under a new label, would come to define every single thing the show ever did. This is not a story about whether Teen Titans Go is good or bad. Those arguments have been had. They are tired. What this is, instead, is a forensic accounting. A careful, methodical walk through the 10 specific ways in which Teen Titans Go was never at any point in its long and commercially successful run an original show. Not in its concept, not in its characters, not in its animation, not in its humor, not even in the way it responded to the people who criticized it. Every piece of the machine was borrowed. Every gear was taken from somewhere else and filed down just enough to fit. You probably already sense where some of this is going. If you have watched the show, even casually, you have noticed the parodies, the references, the callbacks to other media. But the depth of the borrowing runs far deeper than a Breakfast Club homage or a Star Trek riff. It extends to the fundamental architecture of how the show was conceived, how it was produced, how it was animated, how it was written, and how it sustained itself across more than a decade of continuous broadcast. The evidence is specific. It is documented. It is verifiable. You can look up the episode titles. You can check the air dates. You can verify the production credits, the box office numbers, the Billboard chart positions, the voice cast histories, the animation studio contracts, the network scheduling data. All of it is on the record. What follows is not opinion dressed as analysis. It is analysis built on facts, 10 arguments supported by hundreds of individual data points, each one pointing in the same direction. You do not need to take anyone's word for it. The record speaks for itself. So settle in, get comfortable, let the room go dark if you want. This is going to take a while. And if at any point the details start to blur, if the episode titles and air dates begin to run together, and the names of shows and films and characters start to merge into a single stream of information, that is all right. The shape of the argument will hold even when the specifics soften. The shape is simple. Everything was borrowed. Everything was assembled from parts that someone else had made. And the proof is in the details, hundreds of them, laid out one after another in a line that stretches from the show's first episode to its 447th. The first way Teen Titans Go was never original begins at the most basic level possible. The show itself is a direct descendant of something else. Not merely inspired by, not loosely based on, but specifically, deliberately. And transparently derived from a prior property that had already established characters, settings, relationships, and audience expectations over the course of 5 seasons and 65 episodes. In 2003, a show called Teen Titans premiered on Cartoon Network. It ran from July 19, 2003 through January 16, 2006. It was developed by Glenn Murakami, Sam Register, and David Slack. It was produced by DC Entertainment and Warner Brothers. Animation, with Sander Schwartz serving as executive producer and Glenn Murakami, Bruce Timm, and Linda M. Steiner as producers. The show featured a distinctive animation style that blended Western comic book aesthetics with Japanese anime, a fusion so specific that industry observers coined the term Murakanime to describe it. Murakami had previously worked on Batman Beyond and Superman the Animated Series alongside Bruce Timm, and he had made a deliberate decision to break away from the house style of the DC animated universe. In a 2012 interview, Murakami explained that while working with Timm on Batman Beyond, he realized that the Timm-verse aesthetic had already been perfected by his peer, and he needed something different to distinguish his own work. He turned to Japanese animation. He drew heavily from FLCL, which he described as a huge influence, and from Battle of the Planets. He incorporated the super deformed technique common in Japanese anime, where characters are temporarily drawn in exaggerated, simplified proportions to convey extreme emotion. The result was a show that looked and felt like nothing else on American television at the time. Sam Register, then Senior Vice President of Development at Cartoon Network, saw Murakami's unusual anime-influenced style and thought it worked. He greenlit the project in September 2002. The show was a success. The first season generated strong ratings for Cartoon Network, strong enough that the network ordered 52 additional episodes beyond the initial 13. Initially, only 4 seasons were planned, but viewer reception was so positive that Cartoon Network commissioned a 5th season in 2005. The series earned 3 Annie Award nominations. It told serialized stories about identity, belonging, betrayal, and the struggle to do the right thing when the right thing was not clear. It treated its young audience with respect, offering them complex narratives that did not condescend. Each season was built around a central villain and a central theme. The first season centered on Slade, who sought to recruit Robin as his apprentice, and it explored the theme of leadership and the cost of obsession. The second season introduced Terra, a troubled young woman with Earth-manipulating powers, whose arc, culminating in betrayal and sacrifice, remains one of the most emotionally complex storylines in the history of DC animation. The third season focused on Brother Blood and the HIV Academy, with Cyborg at its center, exploring identity and belonging. The fourth season devoted itself entirely to Raven and her demonic father Trigon, a season-long confrontation with Destiny that asked whether a person is defined by their origins or by their choices. The fifth season brought back the Doom Patrol, Beast Boy's original team, and expanded the show's scope to include dozens of young heroes from across the DC universe. Each of these seasons told a complete story with beginning, middle, and end. Each of them developed its characters in ways that lasted beyond the individual episodes. Each of them demanded that its audience pay attention, remember what had come before, and invest in what was to come. And then it was canceled. The final episode, Things Change, aired on January 16, 2006, and ended on an ambiguous note that fans debated for years. The show left behind a legacy of genuine creative achievement, a body of work that proved that a show aimed at children could be visually ambitious, narratively complex, and emotionally honest without alienating the audience it was designed for. For several years after its conclusion, the Teen Titans existed only in reruns and in the memories of the viewers who had grown up watching them. For those who were among those viewers, the feeling is familiar. The particular weight of a show that ended before its audience was ready for it to end, a show whose final episode raised more questions than it answered. That weight carried forward into teenage years and beyond, and when the announcement came that the Teen Titans were coming back, something stirred. Hope, maybe. Curiosity, or the cautious optimism of someone who has been disappointed before. But the property was too valuable to leave dormant. In 2011, Warner Bros. Animation produced a series of shorts for Cartoon Network's DC Nation programming block. These shorts were called New Teen Titans. They used the same voice cast as the 2003 series. Scott Menville returned as Robin, Tara Strong returned as Raven, Greg Saipes returned as Beast Boy, Hynden Walsh returned as Starfire, Kari Payton returned as Cyborg. The shorts kept the same character designs from the 2003 show, but rendered them in a chibi style with larger heads and smaller bodies. The first, short titled Burp, aired as part of a DC Nation preview. The DC Nation block itself did not launch until March 3, 2012, and the short was eventually re-aired within the block on June 30, 2012. The shorts were popular enough that on June 8, 2012, Cartoon Network made a formal announcement. They would revive the Teen Titans as a full series based on these shorts. The new show would premiere in 2013. It would be called Teen Titans Go. The transition from shorts to series happened with remarkable speed. The DC Nation block had barely established itself as a programming concept before the Teen Titans shorts within it were being fast-tracked to full series production. The decision was driven not by any particular creative vision that demanded expansion, but by the viewership data the shorts generated during their brief run. The numbers were good, the brand was recognizable. The path from short to series was well-worn territory in animation. A low-risk development strategy that networks had been using since the days when What a Story, originally a series of theatrical shorts, became the template for countless television adaptations in the 1950s and 1960s. Cartoon Network itself had used this exact pipeline before, developing Regular Show from J.G. Quintel's short films, and Adventure Time from Pendleton Ward's Nicktoons pilot. The difference was that those shows, when they made the jump from short to series, brought with them genuinely original characters, settings, and premises. The new Teen Titans shorts brought characters that had already been on television for 5 seasons. So before a single episode of Teen Titans Go was ever written, the show was already 2 layers of derivation deep. It was based on shorts that were based on a prior television series that was based on a DC Comics property that had existed since 1964. When writer Bob Haney and artist Bruno Premiani introduced the team in The Brave and the Bold number 54, the characters, the setting, the relationships, the villain roster, the voice performances, all of it came pre-built. Teen Titans Go did not create Robin, it did not create Raven, It did not create Beast Boy, Starfire, or Cyborg. It did not design Titan's Tower. It did not invent Jump City. It inherited all of these things from a show that had already done the difficult, risky, uncertain work of establishing them in the minds of an audience. And this was not an incidental detail. This was the foundation on which the entire enterprise was constructed. Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelenic, the developers of Teen Titans Go, were brought together specifically because Warner Bros. Animations wanted someone to take what already existed and retool it for a younger demographic. Horvath had begun his career in the early 2000s as a flash animation artist at Comedy Central. He transitioned into television as a storyboard artist and writer on Nickelodeon series, including El Tigre, The Adventures of Manny Rivera, which ran from 2007 to 2008 random, Cartoons, which ran from 2008 to 2009, and TUFF Puppy, which ran from 2010 to 2013. He then moved to Cartoon Network, where he contributed to the sketch comedy series Mad from 2010 to 2013, as a writer and director on multiple segments. Jelenic, meanwhile, was a DC veteran. He had worked on Batman the Brave and the Bold, where he had made the obscure character B'wana Beast into a fan favorite, and on the Wonder Woman animated movie. The pairing was strategic and deliberate. It was, as production records describe it, a calculated decision within Warner Bros. Animation. Horvath brought experience in fast-paced, irreverent comedy. Jelenic brought knowledge of the DC universe and a demonstrated ability to work comedy material within superhero narratives. Neither of them was being asked to invent something from nothing. They were being asked to remake something that already had a proven audience. This is most clearly visible in the voice cast decision. The choice to bring back all 5 original voice actors was not a creative decision made in service of the new show's artistic vision. It was a marketing decision made in service of brand continuity. Scott Menville, Tara Strong, Greg Sippis, Hynden Walsh, and Kari Payton had been playing these characters since 2003. By the time Teen Titans Go premiered a decade later, the cast had been associated with these roles for so long that their voices were the brand. Their vocal performances were what audiences expected when they heard the words Teen Titans. Using them again was not innovation. It was inheritance. The cast themselves have spoken about this continuity, noting in interviews that they have been friends for 20 years, that the chemistry between them predates Teen Titans Go by a full decade. That chemistry is real and valuable, but it is not something Teen Titans Go created. It is something Teen Titans Go borrowed. Consider what it would have meant if Teen Titans Go had actually been original at this foundational level. It would have meant creating new characters, designing their appearances from scratch, giving them voices that no audience had ever associated with any prior property. It would have meant designing new settings, inventing a world that did not already exist in the minds of viewers. It would have meant hiring new voice actors and building new audience associations through years of patient work. The way that shows like Adventure Time had done when they introduced Finn and Jake to the world in 2010, or the way Steven Universe had done when it introduced its cast in 2013, those shows took risks. They presented audiences with characters and worlds that had no prior existence, no built-in fan base, no guaranteed recognition. They had to earn their audiences from scratch. Teen Titans Go did not have to do any of that. It did not have to earn a single viewer through the quality of its original concepts, because it arrived with viewers pre-attached. The name Teen Titans carried recognition. The voices carried memory. The tower, the city, the team dynamic, all of it was pre-sold to an audience that had spent 3 years from the show's cancellation in 2006 to the announcement of the new Teen Titans shorts in 2011, waiting for the characters to return in some form. The show did not meet those viewers halfway. It did not attempt to honor the expectations that the prior series had created. But it did not need to, because the expectations themselves were enough to get viewers to tune in for the first episode, and once they tuned in, the scheduling strategy would take care of the rest. It arrived with a built-in audience, a built-in cast, a built-in world, and a built-in set of expectations that it could either fulfill or subvert. It chose, consistently, to subvert the expectations in the easiest possible way, by turning what had been dramatic into what was comedic, and by treating the gap between the two as a source of humor. That gap was the show's primary creative engine, and the engine ran on fuel that someone else had refined. The first 8 episodes, which Warner Bros. Animation produced internally before transitioning to the outsourced Flash pipeline, were structured in pairs of 22 minutes each, with 2 11-minute stories sharing a single introduction and end credits sequence. This was a formatting choice seen in dozens of other animated shows, borrowed directly from the standard production model for half-hour animated comedies, a model that had been in continuous use since the earliest days of television animation. Starting with the episode Ghost Boy, the crew began producing each individual episode on its own. But even this shift was not an innovation. It was an adjustment within a pre-existing framework, a minor modification to a template that had been established decades earlier. Horvath and Jelinek are talented creators who would later co-direct the Super Mario Bros. Movie in 2023, which earned over $1 billion worldwide. But talent and originality are not the same thing. You can be extraordinarily skilled at assembling borrowed parts into a functional machine. That does not make the parts new. The depth of the inheritance becomes even more apparent when you examine the show's relationship to the broader DC Comics mythology. The team's name, the Teen Titans, was not created for the 2003 animated series. It was created in 1964 by Bob Haney and Bruno Premiani in the pages of The Brave and the Bold, number 54. The team went through multiple incarnations across the next 5 decades, from the original lineup of Robin, Kid Flash, Aqualad, and Wonder Girl to the new Teen Titans era of the 1980s, when writer Marv Wolfman and artist George Perez created what is widely considered the definitive version of the team. The characters that appeared in the 2003 animated series, and therefore in Teen Titans Go, were drawn from the Wolfman-Perez era. Raven, Starfire, and Cyborg were all Wolfman-Perez creations. Their personalities, their backstories, their relationships, their visual designs, all of these elements were established in the comic books decades before either animated series existed. The 2003 series adapted them for television. Teen Titans Go adapted the adaptation. It was borrowing from a borrower. And the original source, the Wolfman-Perez New Teen Titans, was itself a creative response to the success of Marvel's X-Men under Chris Claremont, who had revitalized that title in the mid-1970s with a similar formula of young, diverse heroes navigating personal drama alongside superhero action. Even the comic book foundation on which everything rested was, at some level, a response to what someone else had already done. But the comic book at least transformed its influences into something recognizably new. The 2003 animated series transformed the comic into something recognizably new. Teen Titans Go transformed neither. It received what it was given and played it for laughs. The second way Teen Titans Go was never original involves what it did to the characters it inherited. And here, a specific term from television criticism becomes useful. Flanderization. The word comes from Ned Flanders, the neighbor character on The Simpsons, who began as a reasonably well-rounded individual and was gradually reduced over the course of many seasons to a single exaggerated trait: his religiosity. Flanderization describes the process by which a complex character is simplified into a caricature, with one defining quality inflated to the point where it overwhelms everything else. Teen Titans Go did not invent Flanderization. It is one of the oldest tricks in the sitcom playbook, and it has been documented in shows ranging from The Simpsons to Seinfeld to The Big Bang Theory to virtually every long-running animated comedy in television history. But what Teen Titans Go did was something unusual even within that long tradition. It took characters that already existed in a carefully developed form and applied Flanderization to them from the very first episode. There was no gradual drift, there was no slow erosion of complexity over multiple seasons. The characters arrived pre-Flanderized, their defining traits already cranked to absurd extremes, as though someone had studied the original Teen Titans characters, identified the single most exaggerated version of each one, and started there. Robin in the original 2003 series was a capable, disciplined leader with a complicated relationship to his mentor Batman. He had a tendency toward obsessive behavior that the show treated as a genuine character flaw, one that occasionally endangered his team and his own well-being. He had a quiet romantic tension with Starfire that developed organically across 5 seasons, never forced, never resolved too neatly, always treated as one thread among many in the fabric of his character. He was serious without being humorless. He was flawed without being unsympathetic. He was, in short, a well-written character. Robin in Teen Titans Go is, from the first episode onward, a manic, narcissistic, emotionally unstable control freak who loses his composure at the slightest provocation. The obsessiveness that was one trait among many in the original has been extracted, amplified, and turned into the entirety of his personality. He is paranoid. He is possessive of his staff, which he believes speaks to him inside his head. He is desperate for validation from his team and from Batman. He borders, as the show's own character descriptions acknowledge, on genuine psychological instability. In the episode Staff Meeting, he became furious then deeply upset after the other Titans broke his staff and called it a stick. The emotional response was played for laughs, but the underlying characterization was pure caricature. Out of all the Titans, Robin is the most prone to acting drastically different and out of character in comparison to his original counterpart. That observation does not come from a critic of the show. It comes from the show's own fan wiki. Beast Boy in the original series was a trickster, yes, but also a character with genuine emotional depth. The show devoted entire episodes to his complicated feelings about his former team, the Doom Patrol, and about his troubled relationship with Terra, a character whose arc remains one of the most debated in all of DC animation. Terra's betrayal of the Titans and her ultimate sacrifice were storylines that the show treated with genuine gravity, and Beast Boy's response to those events revealed a character capable of real grief, real anger, and real growth. Beast Boy in Teen Titans Go is, to put it plainly, a moron. He is lazy, he is gross. In one episode, he spent the entire runtime convincing Starfire that he was a ghost, so he could take advantage of her. The wit and occasional poignancy of the original character have been stripped away entirely, leaving only the surface-level goofiness that was always the least interesting thing about him. Cyborg underwent a similar reduction. In the 2003 series, he was a character defined by his struggle with identity, a young man trying to reconcile his humanity with the mechanical components that kept him alive. The original Cyborg painstakingly took care of Titan's Tower. He had ambitions, he had vulnerabilities, he was capable of heroism and of error in equal measure. In Teen Titans Go, he is Beast Boy's partner in stupidity, a character who smashes things without consequence and whose defining trait is his enthusiasm for various forms of juvenile entertainment. The existential weight of being half machine has been replaced by the comedic convenience of having a body that can produce random gadgets and food on demand. Starfire, who in the original series navigated the comedy of being a fish out of water on Earth, while also carrying the weight of a complicated backstory involving her alien homeworld Tamaran and her villainous sister Blackfire, was reduced in Teen Titans Go to something approximating childlike incomprehension. Her naivete, which in the original was one dimension of a multifaceted character, became her totality. She is dangerously ignorant at times in the new show. In Starfire the Terrible, she became a villain simply because Robin needed an arch-nemesis, and she did not fully understand what that meant. The show also made her far more violent than the original, capable of causing massive destruction when she went on a rampage, and more attached to her pet Silky than to her actual friends. These traits were all borrowed from the broadest possible reading of the original character, amplified beyond recognition, and presented without the nuance that had made the original version interesting. Raven's transformation was perhaps the most revealing. In the original series, she was arguably the most complex character in the ensemble, a half-demon struggling to contain emotions that could literally destroy the world. The fourth season devoted its entire 13-episode arc to her confrontation with her demonic father, Trigon, a storyline that explored themes of destiny, free will, and the question of whether a person is defined by their origins or by their choices. In Teen Titans Go, her darkness was played as deadpan sarcasm, her emotional repression became a running gag, and her hidden love of a fictional show called Pretty Pretty Pegasus became her primary character note. That fictional show was itself borrowed. Pretty Pretty Pegasus is a transparent parody of My Little Pony, geared toward a preschool audience with simplistic speech patterns and childlike plots. The jokes about Raven secretly enjoying it were references to the brony phenomenon that had dominated internet culture in the years leading up to Teen Titans Go's premiere. The show even embedded its voice cast connections into the joke. Tara Strong, who voices Raven, also voices Twilight Sparkle in My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Scott Menville, who voices Robin, had previously voiced Danny in the 1980s My Little Pony series. The implication that even Raven's father Trigon enjoyed Pretty Pretty Pegasus was a direct reference to the adult male brony fandom. The control freak character, a male fan of the show, was another deliberate shout out to that community. Every layer of the joke was referential. Every layer pointed somewhere else. The episode's sum of their parts crystallized the Flanderization problem in a way that was almost too on the nose. In that episode, Robin used a magical crystal, previously introduced in the episode Colors of Raven, to forcibly separate the other Titans into their core personality components. He then handpicked only the traits he wanted, assembling what he considered an efficient team by keeping Cyborg's logical side, Beast Boy's brave side, Starfire's fierce side, and Raven's happy side, while discarding everything else. The episode depicted Robin literally binding Cyborg to a chair and subjecting him to the procedure against his will, played for comedy obviously. But the meta commentary was inescapable. The show had already done to its characters exactly what Robin was doing within the episode. It had separated them into component traits, discarded the inconvenient ones, and kept only the pieces that served the comedic formula. The crystal was a metaphor for the show's own creative process, and the show either did not realize it or did not care. What makes these character transformations particularly notable is not that they happened, but how quickly and completely they happened. In most cases of Flanderization, the process occurs gradually over the course of a show's run. Homer Simpson became progressively dumber across the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons. Peter Griffin became progressively more reckless across the first several seasons of Family Guy. The change is slow enough that regular viewers barely notice it happening in real time. They only see it when they go back and compare early episodes to later ones. Teen Titans Go did not have that gradual arc. The Flanderization was present. From the first episode, the characters arrived already reduced to their most extreme comic potential. This suggests that the Flanderization was not an emergent creative drift, but a deliberate design choice. A decision made before the show was written. Probably during the development phase when Horvath and Jelinek were determining how to distinguish their version of the characters from the 2003 versions. The simplest way to make the same characters feel different was to make them simpler. And simplification in comedy means exaggeration. So the decision to Flanderize was, in essence, the show's foundational creative choice. And that foundational creative choice was borrowed from a process that had been happening in animated comedies for half a century. The characters' relationships were similarly simplified. In the original 2003 series, the romantic dynamic between Robin and Starfire was developed with restraint and patience, treated as a genuine emotional storyline rather than a recurring gag. In Teen Titans Go, Robin's crush on Starfire became a source of constant physical comedy, with Robin behaving in increasingly obsessive and inappropriate ways that the show played entirely for laughs. The unrequited love plot is one of the oldest templates in sitcom history, dating back to Sam and Diane on Cheers and beyond. Teen Titans Go's version added nothing new to it. Beast Boy's relationship with Raven, which in the new show became a slow-burn romantic arc culminating in episodes like BBRA, was handled with more care than some of the show's other character dynamics. But even here, the friends who gradually develop feelings template was borrowed wholesale from the sitcom tradition. The show even acknowledged the Flanderization in certain episodes, though the acknowledgement was played for comedy rather than treated as a genuine creative concern. In the crossover film Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, which brought the two versions of the characters face to face, the contrast between the original characters and their Teen Titans Go counterparts was depicted explicitly. The original Starfire was once again the emotional heart of her team, while the Teen Titans Go Starfire reverted to her more cartoonish behavior. The original Raven took the threat of the dual Trigons seriously, displaying the depth and gravity that had defined her character in the 2003 series, while her Go counterpart played things for laughs. The film's very premise was built on the gap between what the characters had been and what they had become, which means the show's own creators understood the gap perfectly well. They simply had no intention of closing it. The Flanderization was not an oversight. It was the product. Anyone who watched the original series knows what was lost. The difference between a Robin who struggled with his obsessions and a Robin who was nothing but his obsessions. The difference between a Raven who contained multitudes and a Raven who contained a single running gag about a children's show. What the characters were is on the record, and what they became is on the screen. And what they became was not new. It was a pattern as old as animated television itself. The relationships between the characters underwent a similar flattening. In the original 2003 series, the Five Titans functioned as a found family, a group of young people who had come together not by choice but by circumstance, and who had gradually built genuine bonds of trust, affection, and mutual dependence. The dynamic between them was layered and specific. Cyborg and Beast Boy's friendship had a warmth that coexisted with genuine friction. Raven's distance from the group was not a comedic pose, but a manifestation of real fear about what her emotions could do if she let them loose. Robin's leadership was earned through competence, but complicated by his tendency toward obsession and control. Starfire's outsider perspective was a narrative device that allowed the show to examine human customs and relationships from a genuinely alien point of view, generating both comedy and insight. In Teen Titans Go, these relationships were reduced to a set of recurring dynamic templates borrowed from the sitcom playbook. Beast Boy and Cyborg became the buddy pair, the two characters whose friendship is based on shared immaturity. a dynamic that has existed in sitcoms since at least the Laurel and Hardy films of the 1920s. Robin's crush on Starfire became the unrequited love gag, which has been a fixture of comedy since the commedia dell'arte of the 16th century. Raven's role as the group's reluctant participant, the character who would rather be anywhere else, is the sitcom archetype of the deadpan observer, a role performed by characters from Dario Morgendorffer to Rosa Diaz to Ron Swanson across decades of American television. None of these dynamics were created by Teen Titans Go. They were cataloged from the sitcom tradition and assigned to pre-existing characters. None of these character transformations represented new creative ground. Every single one of them followed the established template of how animated comedies have been retooling dramatic characters for decades. When Scooby-Doo went from the relatively serious mystery format of the original 1969 series to the progressively sillier iterations of the 1970s and 1980s, the same process occurred. When Looney Tunes characters were repurposed for various spin-off shows, their complexity was invariably reduced to a single gag. When Filmation and Hanna-Barbera recycled their character libraries across dozens of cheaply produced Saturday morning cartoons, they did exactly what Teen Titans Go did. They took established characters, stripped them to one or two traits, and built simple comedy scenarios around those traits. There is an additional dimension to the Flanderization that deserves mention, because it connects to the broader question of originality. In the original 2003 series, the characters existed within a shared world that had rules, consequences, and continuity. When Robin made a mistake, the consequences of that mistake carried forward into future episodes. When Beast Boy lost Terra, the emotional weight of that loss informed his behavior in subsequent seasons. When Raven faced Trigon, the resolution of that confrontation permanently altered her character and her relationships. The characters existed in time, they changed, they grew, they were, in the truest sense. In Teen Titans Go, the characters exist outside of time. Nothing that happens in one episode has any lasting consequence in the next. Robin can be humiliated, injured, psychologically damaged, and he will be exactly the same Robin in the next episode. Beast Boy can learn a lesson, and he will have unlearned it by the following week. The status quo is permanent and inviolable. This is, of course, the standard structure of episodic comedy. It is how The Simpsons works, it is how Family Guy works, it is how virtually every non-serialized animated comedy works. But in those shows, the lack of continuity is balanced by some other source of depth. The satirical ambition of The Simpsons in its prime, the subversive energy of South Park, the genuine character relationships of Bob's Burgers. Teen Titans Go's version of the reset was borrowed from this tradition, but it borrowed the mechanism without borrowing the compensating elements that made other shows' use of the mechanism feel like a choice rather than a limitation. The technique works. It is commercially effective, it generates content at scale, but it is not new, it has never been new, and applying it to the Teen Titans did not make it new. There is a further dimension to the character borrowing that becomes visible when you examine how the show handled its secondary and recurring characters. Silky, the mutant moth larva who serves as the Titan's pet, was introduced in the original 2003 series in the episode Can I Keep Him? As a genetically altered creature created by the villain Killer Moth. In the original, Silky's introduction served a narrative purpose, advancing the plot and creating genuine tension about whether the creature could be trusted. In Teen Titans Go, Silky became a one-note comedic prop, a pet whose primary function was to eat things, interrupt scenes, and provide a visual gag when the writers needed a quick laugh. The reduction followed the same pattern as the main characters. A creature who had been introduced with narrative complexity was stripped to a single trait and repeated indefinitely. Even the tower itself, Titan's Tower, the T-shaped headquarters that serves as the show's primary setting, was inherited wholesale from the 2003 series. Its design, its location on an island in Jump City's harbor, its interior layout with the common room, the kitchen, the training room, all of these were established by the prior show. Teen Titans Go added nothing to the architecture of the setting. It simply moved into a house that someone else had built and rearranged the furniture for comedy. The third way Teen Titans Go was never original concerns its animation, and here the argument moves from the conceptual to the technical, from questions of character and narrative to questions of production method and visual identity. Because the way a show looks is not merely an aesthetic consideration, it is a creative statement, or at least it should be. The visual language of an animated series communicates as much about its ambitions and its values as its scripts do. And the visual language of Teen Titans Go communicates with remarkable clarity that the show's ambitions were economic rather than artistic. When the original Teen Titans premiered in 2003, Glenn Murakami's fusion of Western and Japanese animation techniques was genuinely distinctive. It was not the first American cartoon to incorporate anime aesthetics. Shows like Totally Spies, which premiered in 2001, and The Boondocks, which premiered in 2005, also drew from Japanese animation. But the degree to which Murakami committed to the blend was unusual. He did not merely borrow surface-level visual cues like large eyes or speed lines. He incorporated the structural logic of anime storytelling into his animation. Action sequences drew from the dynamic compositions of shows like FLCL, with cameras that moved through space rather than simply cutting between static angles. Emotional moments used the super deformed technique that Murakami had studied, allowing characters to shift between realistic and exaggerated proportions within a single scene as a way of modulating tone. The backgrounds had depth and texture, with lighting that changed to reflect mood and time of day. The character movements were fluid and expressive, animated with enough frames to convey weight, momentum, and physical presence. Teen Titans Go abandoned all of that. The show was produced using Adobe Flash, with animation outsourced to Canadian studios. Copernicus Studios, based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, provided posing, animation effects, and compositing using Flash Pro and After Effects. Bartle Entertainment, based in Vancouver, British Columbia, also contributed animation work. Starting from the third season onward, this Flash-based pipeline became the show's standard production method. The result was a visual style that critics described as mediocre and choppy, with a visibly bad frame rate compared to the 2003 series and a flatness that came from Flash's vector-based, symbol reuse approach to animation. This was not a creative choice that the show's producers arrived at through artistic experimentation. It was an economic calculation, and a transparent one. Flash animation, as industry analysts have documented extensively, is used in television production specifically because it is cheap and fast. Its vector-based tools allow animators to create reusable character rigs, digital puppet systems where a character's body parts are drawn once and then repositioned rather than redrawn for each new frame. Its tween functions automate certain types of movement, generating smooth transitions between keyframes without the need for an animator to draw every intermediate pose. Its symbol library system means that once a character's head, torso, arms, legs, and facial expressions have been cataloged, they can be assembled in new combinations indefinitely. All of these features make Flash animation significantly less expensive than traditional hand-drawn animation, which requires unique drawings for every frame, and less expensive even than the more labor-intensive digital animation techniques used by studios like Studio Mir in South Korea, which animated shows like The Legend of Korra and Voltron: Legendary Defender. The criticism was specific and consistent. As one analysis put it, the Flash animation looks pretty mediocre and choppy compared to the original show's animation. Another noted that the problem was not the style itself, but the fact that there was no depth or detail to it, giving viewers nothing to look at. The color scheme drew its own criticism. The palette was noticeably brighter and more saturated than the original series, with some viewers complaining that the aggressive brightness was literally hard on their eyes. The original 2003 series had used color deliberately, shifting its palette to match the emotional tone of individual scenes, darkening the screen during moments of tension. Teen Titans Go used a single, uniformly bright palette that did not modulate with the narrative, because the narrative did not require modulation. The brightness was a feature of the Flash pipeline, not a creative choice. Digital vector art defaults to clean, bright, uniform color fields because that is what the software produces most efficiently. Achieving the subtle color gradations and atmospheric lighting of traditionally animated shows requires additional time, skill, and production budget that the Flash pipeline was specifically designed to avoid. The original Teen Titans featured what critics described as carefully drawn and unique animation, seamlessly blending the Japanese manga and anime style. While Teen Titans Go used Flash animation, the program that amateurs use to upload silly videos to Newgrounds. That comparison, while blunt, captured something real about the perception gap between the two shows. And here is where the lack of originality becomes structural. Teen Titans Go was not the first Cartoon Network show to use this approach. It was not even the first Cartoon Network show of its era to use this approach. By 2013, Flash animation had become the default production method for a large segment of the American animation industry. Shows like Johnny Test, which ran from 2005 to 2014, had already demonstrated that Flash could sustain a long-running series at low cost. The 2016 reboot of the Powerpuff Girls used the same basic production pipeline. Total Drama, which ran from 2007 to 2014, was animated in a similar style. The visual language that Teen Titans Go employed was not its own. It was the visual language of cost-efficient television animation in the 2010, and the show adopted it wholesale. Flash production had become so associated with cheap-looking television animation that critics coined a term for it, noting that its vector, symbol reuse, and tween-driven methods encouraged mechanical motion, repeated assets, and flat visuals. The comparison with other shows that were being produced at the same time as Teen Titans Go makes the point even more clearly. While Teen Titans Go was being animated in Flash by Copernicus Studios in Halifax, Studio Mir in South Korea was animating The Legend of Korra for Nickelodeon with a level of visual ambition that made it one of the most beautiful animated series ever aired on American television. While Teen Titans Go was reusing character rigs and tweening between keyframes, the animators on Gravity Falls were drawing detailed, atmospheric backgrounds that gave the show's Pacific Northwest setting a tangible, lived-in quality. While Teen Titans Go was producing flat, symbol-based compositions, Steven Universe was developing a distinctive visual style with soft color palettes and emotionally expressive character animation that matched the show's themes of empathy and growth. These were all contemporary shows. They all existed within the same economic constraints of television animation. They all had to meet budgets and deadlines and network demands. But they made different choices about how to allocate their resources, and those choices resulted in visual identities that were unmistakably their own. You can defend the animation choice on practical grounds. The economics of children's television are brutal. Networks demand high episode counts at low per episode budgets, and Flash animation makes those numbers work. The original Teen Titans produced 65 episodes over 4 years. Teen Titans Go has produced over 440 episodes over 13 years. That volume would have been impossible at the original show's production quality and cost structure. But a practical justification is not the same as a creative one. The animation style of Teen Titans Go was borrowed from the industry standard of its time. Just as the animation style of cheap Saturday morning cartoons in the 1970s was borrowed from the cost-cutting techniques that Hanna-Barbera had pioneered a decade earlier, the technology changes. The economic logic does not. And the result, in both cases, is animation that serves the budget rather than the art. Anyone who has ever watched an episode of Teen Titans Go and felt that something about it looked flat, looked cheap, looked somehow less alive than the cartoons remember from childhood, was not imagining it. That feeling was the economic logic made visible. There is an important counter-argument to address here, because defenders of Teen Titans Go's visual style have made it. The argument goes like this. The show's chibi-inspired character designs, with their large heads and small bodies, constitute an aesthetic choice distinct from the original series, one that signals to the viewer that this is a comedy, not a drama. The proportions tell you what kind of show you are watching before a single word of dialogue is spoken. That argument has merit, but it also has a problem. The chibi style was not something Teen Titans Go invented. It was borrowed from the new Teen Titans shorts that preceded it, which were themselves borrowing the technique from the super deformed tradition of Japanese anime that Murakami had already incorporated into the 2003 series during its comedic moments. The chibi proportions of Teen Titans Go are the original show's comedy mode made permanent. What was a temporary shift in the 2003 series, a visual gag used to punctuate emotional extremes, became the default state in the new show. The show took one specific visual technique from its predecessor's toolkit and made it the entire toolkit. Even its most distinctive visual characteristic was derivative of the show it descended from. Compare this with how other animated shows of the same era approached their visual identity. Steven Universe, created by Rebecca Sugar and premiering in November 2013, just 7 months after Teen Titans Go, developed a visual style that was genuinely its own. Its color palettes, its character proportions, its background art, all of it was designed to serve the specific emotional register of that specific show. Gravity Falls, created by Alex Hirsch and premiering in June 2012, developed a visual language that combined the aesthetics of Pacific Northwest tourism imagery with horror-influenced character design in a way that no prior show had attempted. Over the Garden Wall, which aired as a miniseries in November 2014, drew from early 20th century American illustration in a way that gave it an unmistakable visual identity. These were shows that looked like themselves and only like themselves because their creators had invested the creative energy required to develop original visual vocabularies. Defenders of the show's visual approach have argued that with Flash, the animators can quickly change things like the tone and texture of characters and backgrounds, creating an animation style that is weird and offbeat, which matches the show's vibe. That argument has a superficial appeal, but it conflates the capabilities of a tool with the creative choices made using that tool. Flash can produce visually distinctive work. The web animation community demonstrated this throughout the 2000s, with independent animators using Flash to create works of genuine visual imagination on platforms like Newgrounds. And YouTube, the problem was not the tool. The problem was the way the tool was used within a production pipeline optimized for volume and speed rather than for visual experimentation. When you are producing 52 episodes per season across multiple seasons, the temptation to use Flash's default capabilities rather than pushing its boundaries becomes overwhelming. And Teen Titans Go overwhelmingly used Flash at its default level, producing animation that looked like what Flash animation looks like when you use it quickly and efficiently, rather than creatively and ambitiously. Watched with this understanding, the visual experience shifts. What might initially look like a deliberate aesthetic choice, a playful simplification of the original's more detailed style, reveals itself as a constraint masquerading as a preference. The flat backgrounds, the limited range of character expressions, the reliance on repeated poses and recycled assets, all of these are artifacts of the production method, not manifestations of an artistic vision. The show looks the way it looks because that is what Flash animation at television scale budgets looks like. This look has appeared before in other shows on other networks because it is the same look. The original Teen Titans looked distinctive because Murakami and his team made specific, deliberate, risky choices about how to blend two different animation traditions. Teen Titans Go looks like every other Flash animated show of its era because it was produced using the same tools, the same techniques, and the same cost structure as every other Flash animated show of its era. There is nothing wrong with that. But there is nothing original about it either. The animation comparison becomes even more striking when you place specific scenes from the two shows side by side. In the original 2003 series, the episode Apprentice Part 2 contained a fight sequence between Robin and Slade that lasted nearly 3 minutes and featured over a dozen distinct camera angles, fluid character animation with full body movement drawn frame by frame, dynamic lighting that shifted with each exchange of blows, and background elements that responded to the action, with walls cracking and debris scattering as the fight progressed. The sequence conveyed weight. You could feel the impact of each strike because the animators had drawn the recoil, the follow-through, the momentary stillness before the next movement. In Teen Titans Go, fight sequences, when they occurred at all, were typically resolved in seconds. Characters would charge at each other, the screen would fill with a dust cloud peppered with stars and exclamation marks. A technique borrowed directly from the visual shorthand of newspaper comic strips dating back to the early 20th century, and the fight would be over. The dust cloud fight was not a creative choice. It was an economic choice. Drawing an actual fight sequence with choreographed movements and reactive environments requires exponentially more animation work than drawing a static dust cloud with a few limbs poking out. The dust cloud was efficient. It communicated the idea of a fight without requiring the work of animating one. And that efficiency, that substitution of shorthand for substance, was the defining characteristic of the show's visual approach from beginning to end. The production numbers tell the same story. The original 2003 Teen Titans was animated primarily by Lotto Animation in South Korea, with additional work by Dongwoo Animation. Both studios specializing in traditional hand-drawn animation with a high frame count that gave the action sequences their fluidity and weight. Each episode of the original series required weeks of painstaking work from teams of animators drawing individual frames by hand. Teen Titans Go's Flash pipeline, by contrast, allowed Copernicus Studios and Bardell Entertainment to produce episodes on significantly tighter timelines. The digital puppet rigs meant that once a character was built, it could be posed and repositioned indefinitely without new drawings. The tween automation meant that transitions between poses could be generated by software rather than drawn by hand. The symbol libraries meant that backgrounds, props, and facial expressions could be reused across dozens of episodes without modification. This is efficient. This is practical. This is how modern television animation at scale gets made. But it is also how every other Flash animated show at scale gets made. The pipeline was generic. The tools were generic. The output looked generic. You could take a still frame from Teen Titans Go, remove the characters, and show someone the background art alone, and they would be unable to distinguish it from the background art of a dozen other Flash animated shows that were airing at the same time. The backgrounds were functional. They communicated the necessary spatial information. They told you whether the characters were inside or outside, in the tower or in the city, in a cave or on a beach, but they did not create atmosphere. They did not suggest a world beyond the edges of the frame. They did not invite you to look closely because there was nothing to find when you looked closely. Contrast this with the backgrounds of Gravity Falls, where hidden symbols and codes were embedded in nearly every frame, rewarding attentive viewers with Easter eggs that connected to the show's larger mystery. Contrast it with the backgrounds of Adventure Time, where the post-apocalyptic landscape of Ooo contained visual details that gradually revealed the world's history over the course of multiple seasons. Contrast it with the backgrounds of Steven Universe, where the color palette and composition of each scene were carefully designed to reflect the emotional state of the characters within it. Those backgrounds were not just settings, they were storytelling tools. Teen Titans Go's backgrounds were wallpaper. And the decision to use this pipeline, rather than investing in a more distinctive visual approach, was a commercial decision that produced a commercial result. The fourth way Teen Titans Go was never original is embedded in the very episodes it produced. The show, across its 447 episodes, developed what can only be described as a structural dependence on whole plot references. A whole plot reference, as documented by the television analysis community, is an episode whose entire narrative structure is borrowed from a pre-existing work. Not a joke about another show. Not a brief visual homage. Not a character wearing a costume that reminds you of someone else. An entire episode that functions as a retelling of someone else's story, with Teen Titans characters substituted in for the original cast. The joke is the substitution itself. The comedy comes from seeing familiar characters in an unfamiliar context. And the plot comes from someone else's imagination. The list is extensive, and it covers the entire run of the show. The episode Space is a whole plot reference to the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, originally written by Morgan Gendel and Peter Allen Fields and aired on June 1st, 1992. In the original, Captain Jean-Luc Picard is struck by a beam from an alien probe and lives an entire lifetime as a member of a dying civilization, learning to play a Resiken flute. The episode is widely regarded as one of the finest in the history of the franchise, and won the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation in 1993. In the Teen Titans Go version, an ancient alien probe renders Robin unconscious and causes him to live a full life in the final days of a dying alien civilization, where he learns to play the trombone. The emotional weight of the original, its meditation on mortality and memory, is replaced with the humor of Robin playing the trombone badly. The plot, however, is the same. The Island Adventures multi-episode arc contained multiple whole plot references compressed into a single extended storyline. Coconut Cream Pie was a retelling of Gilligan's Island, the CBS sitcom that ran from 1964 to 1967. The casting was precise. Beast Boy was Gilligan. Starfire was Ginger. Robin was the Professor. Raven was Mary Ann. The premise, a group of disparate personalities stranded on an island and failing to escape, was lifted directly from the original show. Pure Protein was a retelling of the reality competition format popularized by Survivor, the CBS competition series that premiered in 2000. Open Door Policy drew its premise from Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg's 1993 film based on Michael Crichton's 1990 novel. Crazy Desire Island was a retelling of Fantasy Island, the ABC series that ran from 1977 to 1984, with Robin cast as Mr. Rourke, the mysterious host who granted visitors their deepest wishes. And The Titan Show was a retelling of The Truman Show, Peter Weir's 1998 film, starring Jim Carrey, revealing that the island was a constructed set and the Titans were being secretly filmed for the amusement of the villain Control Freak and a gallery of other villains who served as the audience. Booty Scooty took the plot of The Goonies, Richard Donner's 1985 adventure film, written by Chris Columbus, from a story by Steven Spielberg. The Titans needed to find pirate treasure to save their tower from wealthy land developers, mirroring the Goonies' quest to find One-Eyed Willie's treasure to save their neighborhood from foreclosure. Robin was forced to perform a dance modeled on the Truffle Shuffle that the character Chunk performs in the original film. A character kept shackled in the basement was a parody of Sloth, the deformed but gentle Fratelli brother. The skeleton piano scene, the wishing well scene, and the This Is Our Time speech were all reproduced. The sequel episode, Curse of the Booty Scooty, returned to the same source material. Hey You, Don't Forget About Me in Your Memory, which first aired on September 10th, 2015, was a retelling of The Breakfast Club, John Hughes' 1985 film about 5 high school students serving Saturday detention. Robin assigned each Titan a high school stereotype: Starfire as the homecoming queen, Cyborg as the jock, Raven as the basket case, Beast Boy as the nerd. They were sent to detention in a library, wearing retro 1980s clothing. The episode's title was itself a reference to the Simple Minds song Don't You, Forget About Me, which plays over the closing credits of the film and has become one of the most iconic movie music associations in cinema history. We're Off to Get Awards was a retelling of The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 MGM film, starring Judy Garland. Robin was swept up by a tornado and transported to a magical land where he sought an award from the Wizard of Awards. Robin's golden tuxedo was a reference to Dorothy's ruby slippers. Cyborg played the Tin Man. Raven played the Wicked Witch, renamed the Sassy Sorceress of the South. Beast Boy played the Scarecrow, but appeared as a crow. The episode featured a song that directly parodied We're Off to See the Wizard. Body Adventure was a retelling of the Fantastic Voyage plot, a narrative template that dates back to the 1966 film of the same name, about a submarine crew shrunk to microscopic size and injected into a scientist's body. This plot has been recycled by dozens of animated shows before Teen Titans Go ever got to it, including The Magic School Bus, Futurama, Rick and Morty, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Family Guy. Oregon Trail took the premise and visual style of the educational computer game that had been a fixture of American classrooms since the 1970s. The graphics and menus were lifted directly from the game, down to the green text on black backgrounds. The hunting sequence replicated the game's hunting mechanic, including the restriction that you could not carry more than 100 pounds back to the wagon. Beast Boy's death was a parody of the famous X has died of dysentery message that became one of the earliest widespread internet memes. Before shooting a buffalo, Robin shouted, "Say hello to my little friend," itself a reference to the 1983 film Scarface, making the episode a reference inside a reference. Video game references had the Titans exploring virtual reality versions of classic video games, with each Titan assigned a different borrowed game world. Beast Boy played a game modeled on Frogger, the 1981 Konami arcade game. Cyborg navigated a scenario based on Spy Hunter, the 1983 Bally Midway arcade game. Starfire's adventure was based on The Legend of Zelda, Nintendo's 1986 action-adventure game. Raven's segment drew from Pac-Man, Namco's 1980 arcade phenomenon. Robin's adventure was a recreation of Super Mario Bros., Nintendo's 1985 platformer. The episode was, in effect, 5 borrowed game premises compressed into 11 minutes. Each segment recreated the visual language, the gameplay logic, and the iconic imagery of its source material with considerable fidelity. The result was entertaining for anyone who recognized the references. But the entertainment came entirely from the source material. The video games being referenced were themselves cultural landmarks with decades of history. Teen Titans Go added Teen Titans characters to those landmarks. That was the creative contribution. And nostalgia is not a substitute for an actual story which aired as the 228th episode of the series, sent the Titans back to the 1980s to determine whether it was the best decade ever, with its title and opening plot both directly mocking Stranger Things for relying on 1980s nostalgia rather than original storytelling. The pattern continued well into the show's later seasons, growing bolder rather than more restrained as the years progressed. Toddler Titans, yay, the 295th episode of the series was a wholesale parody of Dora the Explorer, the Nick Jr. educational show that had been airing since 2000. The villain, Control Freak, transported the Titans from what the episode labeled TV Teen to TV Baby, trapping them in a preschool show format. Robin became a Dora analog. Cyborg was transformed into a talking backpack, referencing Dora's companion backpack. Starfire became a kitten with mittens. Raven became a book. Beast Boy became Greenie the Clue Dog, a direct parody of Blue from Blue's Clues, the Nick Jr. show that premiered in 1996. A beaver character named Taker served as a parody of Swiper the Fox, and the Titans stopped him using the same repetitive verbal formula that Dora uses to stop Swiper, saying, "Taker, do not be taking 3 times." The episode even parodied Dora's travel song with its own version called D-Day Do Do Do. Every structural element, every character mapping, every recurring bit was lifted directly from the source material. The episode was a precise, almost mechanical recreation of Dora the Explorer's formula, with Teen Titans characters inserted into the template. The Survivor episode, appropriately named, borrowed its entire premise from the CBS reality competition series that had premiered in 2000. The episode featured team divisions, confession camera segments where characters spoke directly to a camera about their strategies and feelings, gross eating challenges, and a tribal council sequence. The show recreated the visual grammar of reality television, a genre with its own highly codified set of conventions, and applied it without modification to the Titans. If you had never seen Survivor or any of its imitators, the episode would have been bewildering. If you had, the episode was a recognition exercise. a spot the reference game dressed up as a narrative. Finally, a lesson parodied HGTV home renovation shows, borrowing the format of property renovation programming that had become a staple of American cable television in the 2010. The visual language of HGTV, the before and after reveals, the renovation montages, the earnest hosts explaining design choices, was reproduced with enough fidelity that the parody could only work if the viewer was already familiar with the original format. That last example deserves particular attention because of the irony it contains. Teen Titans Go produced an episode whose title explicitly criticizes other media for substituting nostalgia for original narrative. And it aired that episode as part of a show that was itself entirely built on borrowed premises, recycled characters, and references to existing properties. The show also produced an episode called Movie Night, described in its own promotional materials as its most cinematic installment, in which the Titans parodied 4 different movie genres within a single episode. The very concept of a movie night episode in which characters watch or participate in genre parodies is itself a borrowed template. Community did it with its genre episodes. The Simpsons did it with its Treehouse of Horror specials. Futurama did it with its Anthology of Interest episodes. The format of compressing multiple genre parodies into a single episode or special has been used by animated comedies for so long that it has become its own subgenre, one with established conventions and expectations. Teen Titans Go followed those conventions without deviating from them. The show was, at the moment it aired that title card, unaware of its own reflection in the mirror. Or perhaps it was entirely aware, and the irony was the point. Either reading is damning, if the show did not see the irony, it lacked self-awareness. If it did see the irony, it lacked a conviction to do anything about it. The sheer density of references in some episodes is worth noting separately, because it reveals how deeply the borrowing runs even within episodes that are not whole plot references. The A-Farce episode referenced People's Court. Judge Judy and America's Court were Judge Ross. The Real Boy Adventures episode borrowed its title, its central conceit, and multiple specific scenes from Disney's Pinocchio, with Cyborg standing in for the puppet who wanted to become a real boy and Beast Boy transforming into a cricket as a reference to Jiminy Cricket. The Movie Night episode, which the show's own promotional materials described as its most cinematic installment, parodied 4 different movie genres within its runtime, compressing multiple borrowed templates into a single episode. The classic Titans episode parodied the cheap animation style of 1960s Saturday morning cartoons, recreating the limited animation techniques of studios like Filmation and Hanna-Barbera with deliberate fidelity. The irony of that particular parody was considerable. A show produced using modern cost-cutting animation techniques was mocking the cost-cutting animation techniques of an earlier era, apparently without recognizing that both approaches were motivated by the same economic logic. The Books episode imported literary characters wholesale, bringing Pinocchio, the Invisible Man, and Benjamin Franklin into the show's world and building its narrative around their pre-existing characteristics and cultural associations. The show did not reinterpret these figures or use them to explore new ideas. It placed them in proximity to the Titans and let the incongruity generate the comedy. The comedy came from the collision of contexts, not from any original observation about the characters or the literature they came from. Even the episode Bottle episode was a borrowed concept. Its title referencing the television production term for a low-budget episode set in a single location, and its structure referencing the clip show format that shows like The Simpsons, South Park, and the original Powerpuff Girls had all previously deconstructed. Now, parody is a legitimate art form. Nobody disputes that. The Simpsons built some of its finest episodes around extended homages to other works. Futurama routinely structured episodes of science fiction pastiches. Community became famous for its genre episodes, each one a loving and carefully constructed tribute to a specific film or television tradition. But in those shows, the borrowed structure served as a framework for original character development, thematic exploration, and comedic invention that went beyond the source material. The parody was the starting point, not the destination. In Teen Titans Go, the whole plot references frequently serve as the entire substance of the episode. The joke is the reference, the plot is the reference. Once you have identified what is being parodied, you have extracted most of what the episode has to offer. This is not parody in the tradition of Mel Brooks or the Zucker Brothers, where the source material is a springboard for invention. This is parody as substitution, where the source material replaces the need for invention. And the sheer volume of whole plot reference episodes in the show's catalog makes it clear that this was not an occasional creative indulgence, but a systematic production strategy. When you need to produce 52 episodes per season, as Teen Titans Go did for most of its run, The temptation to borrow an existing plot structure rather than invent a new one becomes not just tempting, but practically irresistible. A writer staring at a blank page who knows that the episode needs to be delivered in 2 weeks has a simple choice: invent something from nothing or adapt something that already exists. The first option is harder, slower, and riskier. The second option is easier, faster, and safer. Teen Titans Go chose the second option so frequently that it became the show's default creative mode. The density of borrowed material within individual episodes sometimes reached remarkable levels. Consider the opening credit sequence, which changed with each season. In Season 2, Beast Boy performed a portion of the Thriller dance, the choreography from Michael Jackson's 1983 music video directed by John Landis. In Season 3, Robin performed Gangnam Style, the dance from South Korean musician Psy's 2012 viral hit that became the first YouTube video to reach 1 billion views. In the same credit sequence, Cyborg performed the pelvic thrust from the same song, and Beast Boy performed the Carlton dance, the signature move of Carlton Banks, Will Smith's cousin on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which originally aired on NBC from 1990 to 1996. The dance was performed by actor Alfonso Ribeiro and became one of the most recognizable dance moves in American pop culture. These were small details, lasting only a few seconds each, but they were revealing. Even in the opening credits, in the few seconds that introduce the show to its audience before a single line of dialogue has been spoken, the default creative mode was to borrow recognizable cultural artifacts rather than create new ones. The credits did not establish a visual identity unique to Teen Titans Go. They established a catalog of references to other people's creative work. The show's fan wiki maintains a category page specifically devoted to episodes that are categorized as parodies. The list is long. It includes not just the whole plot references discussed above, but dozens of additional episodes that borrow their central concepts, visual motifs, or narrative structures from pre-existing works. The show's engagement with other media is not supplementary. It is foundational. Remove the references, remove the parodies, remove the homages and the callbacks, and the genre imitations. And what remains is remarkably thin. A handful of domestic comedy episodes about 5 characters sitting in a tower. A handful of action sequences played for laughs. A handful of musical numbers, some original, some borrowed. That is the original content of Teen Titans Go, stripped of everything it took from other sources. It would not fill a single season. The reliance on parody as a narrative crutch had a cumulative effect on the show's creative identity, or rather, on its lack of one. After 447 episodes, it is remarkably difficult to identify what Teen Titans Go is about, in the way that you can identify what other animated comedies are about. The Simpsons is about the American family in late capitalism. South Park is about the absurdity of contemporary moral panics filtered through the eyes of children. Bob's Burgers is about the resilience of a working-class family whose love for each other is expressed through the mundane rituals of running a small business. Gravity Falls is about the relationship between childhood wonder and adult knowledge, about what is gained and what is lost in the passage from one to the other. Each of these shows has a thematic center, a core idea that gives every episode a reason to exist beyond the immediate need to fill a programming slot. Teen Titans Go does not have a thematic center. It has a premise. 5 superheroes live together and do silly things. But a premise is not a theme. A premise tells you where the characters are. A theme tells you why you should care. And the question of why you should care about Teen Titans Go, beyond the immediate pleasure of recognizing a reference or laughing at a physical gag, is a question the show never attempted to answer, because answering it would have required the kind of original creative thought that the show's production model was specifically designed to avoid. There is a revealing exercise that can be performed with virtually any episode of Teen Titans Go. Take the episode's plot and ask, has this plot been done before? In another show, in another film, in another medium? In the vast majority of cases, the answer is yes, and the prior version can be identified quickly and specifically. The Treasure Hunt episode borrows from The Goonies. The Courtroom episode borrows from Perry Mason and its successors. The Body Shrinking episode borrows from Fantastic Voyage. The Time Travel episode borrows from Back to the Future. The Competition episode borrows from every reality television show since Survivor. The Holiday episode borrows from the holiday episode tradition that has existed since the earliest days of sitcom television. The School episode borrows from the school episode tradition. The Camping episode borrows from the camping episode tradition. Each episode is a node in a web of references, and each thread of that web leads back to something that was created by someone else. The web is Teen Titans Go's actual structure, the invisible architecture that holds the entire enterprise together. and none of the threads were spun by the show itself. The fifth way Teen Titans Go was never original involves its humor, and here the case requires a degree of precision, because humor is inherently referential. All comedy builds on what came before it. Jokes work by subverting expectations, and expectations are formed by prior experience. So to say that a comedy show's humor is unoriginal requires identifying not just influences, but dependencies. Patterns of comedic construction that the show did not merely draw from, but relied upon as its primary mode of operation. Teen Titans Go's comedy operates in three distinct registers. The first is physical comedy and gross-out humor. Fart jokes, butt jokes, food fights, bodily functions played for laughs. Exaggerated violence without consequence. The second is meta humor. Jokes about the show itself, about its critics, about the conventions of television, about the fact that the characters exist within an animated medium. The third is referential humor. Jokes that derive their comedy from the audience's recognition of the thing being referenced, whether that thing is a film, a television show, a video game, a song, or a cultural phenomenon. None of these registers was invented by Teen Titans Go. Consider the first register. Physical and gross-out humor has been a staple of children's animation since the earliest days of the medium. The original Looney Tunes shorts of the 1940s and 1950s were built on physical comedy. Ren and Stimpy, created by John Kricfalusi and premiering in 1991, pushed gross-out humor to extreme lengths that had not been seen before on American television. The show depicted bodily functions, physical deformity, and visceral disgust, with a specificity and intensity that shocked audiences and delighted children. SpongeBob SquarePants, which premiered in 1999 and is now one of the longest-running animated series in American television history, built an empire on a carefully calibrated mix of absurdist physical comedy and genuinely clever wordplay. By the time Teen Titans Go premiered in 2013, the gross-out comedy tradition in children's animation was so well established that it had its own critics, its own defenders, and its own extensive body of academic analysis. The specific flavor of gross-out humor in Teen Titans Go follows a template that was set not just by Ren and Stimpy and SpongeBob, but by shows that had aired on the same network in the years immediately preceding it. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, which aired on Cartoon Network from 2008 to 2010, combined grotesque physical comedy with an unsettling visual style that influenced an entire generation of Cartoon Network shows. Chowder, which aired from 2007 to 2010, built its entire premise around food and incorporated physical comedy into its exploration of culinary chaos. Both of those shows predated Teen Titans Go on the same network and established the baseline for the kind of physical comedy that Cartoon Network's younger audience expected and enjoyed. Teen Titans Go adopted that baseline without modifying it. The fart jokes, the obsession with food, the constant references to bodily functions, the episodes built around the characters eating too much or making a mess, or experiencing physical transformations played for laughs, all of these were pre-existing comedy tropes that the show inherited from its immediate predecessors. There was a whole song about poop in the fifth season, a musical number built entirely around excrement, performed with the same production value as the show's other musical sequences. The episode Bud Adams explored the idea that the Titans' buttocks contained atomic power. The Uncle Jokes episode featured an extended sequence of the Titans telling jokes so terrible that they physically harmed each other. A premise borrowed from the long tradition of anti-humor that dates back to vaudeville and was popularized in animation by shows like The Ren and Stimpy Show and later by Tim and Eric Awesome Show. Great job. Beast Boy and Cyborg's obsession with the bathroom became a running gag across multiple seasons, appearing so frequently that the show's fan wiki maintains a dedicated page cataloging its running gags, with bodily functions prominently featured. These were not innovations in gross-out comedy. They were contributions to a genre that had been fully formed before Teen Titans Go ever aired. The second register, meta humor, had been done extensively before Teen Titans Go attempted it. Animaniacs, which ran from 1993 to 1998, was built almost entirely on meta comedy. Its characters, Yakko, Wakko, and Dot Warner, were explicitly aware that they existed in a cartoon. They broke the fourth wall constantly. They commented on their own show's production. They satirized the entertainment industry, the studio system, and the conventions of animation itself. The Powerpuff Girls, created by Craig McCracken while he was a student at CalArts and premiering in 1998, included regular meta-commentary about the conventions of superhero narratives and children's television. Its narrator was a character in his own right, interacting with the story he was ostensibly describing. Freakazoid, which ran from 1995 to 1997, and was produced by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, was essentially an entire show about breaking the fourth wall, with a protagonist who talked to the audience, left the show to visit other programs, and treated the boundary between fiction and reality as a comedic playground. Even Phineas and Ferb, which premiered on Disney Channel in 2007, had made fourth wall breaking and format awareness a regular part of its comedic toolkit. By 2013, meta humor in animation was not a novel technique. It was a genre convention with a 20-year history and dozens of practitioners. Teen Titans Go's own meta jokes often acknowledged this lineage, sometimes explicitly. The show made jokes about its limited animation budget, with characters commenting on the fact that they could not move certain body parts due to the constraints of flash animation. In one sequence, a character observed that he could only turn his head and nothing else. A gag about the limitations of the digital puppet rigs that define the show's visual production. Beast Boy was restricted to transforming into only one animal in certain episodes, a joke about the animation requirements of creating new animal models. These were clever observations about the realities of television animation production. But self-aware observations about animation limitations had been a staple of cartoons since the days when Daffy Duck argued with his animator in the 1953 Warner Brothers. Short Duck Amuck, directed by Chuck Jones, widely regarded as one of the greatest animated films ever made. The technique of a cartoon character acknowledging the artificiality of his own existence was literally 70 years old by the time Teen Titans Go attempted it. The third register, referential humor, is where Teen Titans Go's lack of originality is most visible, because it is also the register in which the show is most dependent. The show does not merely reference other media, it depends on those references for its comedy. If a viewer does not recognize that space is referencing Star Trek, the episode loses its comedic engine entirely. If that same viewer does not recognize that Booty Scooty is referencing the Goonies, the Truffle Shuffle parody is meaningless. The comedy is not built on top of the references, using them as a foundation for original jokes. The comedy is the references. The recognition is the punchline. Someone who has seen the movie laughs, someone who has not sits there wondering what was missed. Enjoyment of the show depends not on what the show itself has created, but on what the viewer brings to it from prior viewing history. This approach was popularized, though not invented, by Family Guy, which premiered in 1999 and which built much of its humor around cutaway gags that referenced films, television shows, and pop culture moments without necessarily adding comedic value beyond the recognition itself. The criticism that Family Guy substituted reference for invention has been a staple of animation criticism for over 2 decades, most notably articulated in a 2006 episode of South Park that depicted the Family Guy writers as manatees pushing idea balls into a machine to generate random pop culture references. Teen Titans Go adopted the same model, merely adjusting it for a younger audience. The references shifted from adult pop culture to family-friendly pop culture. The mechanism remained the same. The comedy derived from recognition rather than invention. There is a related phenomenon worth noting here, because it connects to the broader pattern. Teen Titans Go frequently incorporated musical numbers into its episodes. Songs appeared throughout the series, some of them original compositions, some of them parodies of existing songs. The show's use of music as a comedic tool was itself borrowed from a tradition that stretches back through Animaniacs, through Schoolhouse Rock, through The Muppets, through the entire history of musical comedy in American entertainment. But even when the songs were technically original, the comedic framework around them, the use of a song to punctuate an absurd moment, to summarize a lesson ironically, to provide an emotional climax that the narrative had not earned, was a technique that had been refined by other shows long before Teen Titans Go attempted it. The Simpsons had been doing musical parody episodes since the early 1990s. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, was an entire musical film built on genre parody in 1999. Phineas and Ferb incorporated original songs into virtually every episode from 2007 onward. Even the show's most celebrated musical moment, the use of The Night Begins to Shine, was built around a song that someone else had written years earlier, discovered by accident in a music library. There is a specific example that crystallizes the referential dependency. The episode in which Cyborg is hooked up to the Titan's Tower mainframe and starts acting like HAL 9000. The artificial intelligence from Stanley Kubrick's 1968 film 2001, A Space Odyssey, even uttering the famous line, adapted as, "I'm sorry, but I cannot do that." For anyone unfamiliar with 2001 A Space Odyssey, or unaware of the HAL 9000 character and his iconic dialogue, this scene is meaningless. It is not funny on its own terms. It does not generate comedy through its own internal logic. The comedy exists exclusively in the gap between the original source material and the Teen Titans Go context. Remove the reference and the joke vanishes. There is nothing underneath. This is the defining characteristic of referential humor as Teen Titans Go practices it. It is not humor that uses references as seasoning, adding flavor to jokes that would work without them. It is humor that uses references as structure, building jokes that collapse entirely without the audience's prior knowledge. Enjoyment of any given episode depends less on the writing of that episode than on familiarity with whatever is being referenced. And that means the comedic quality of the show is not really a product of its own creative work. It is a product of the quality of the things it is referencing. The Goonies is a good movie, so the Booty Scooty episode has good material to work with. The Breakfast Club is a good movie, so the Hey You, Don't Forget About Me in Your Memory episode has good material to work with. The Inner Light is a great episode of Star Trek, so the Space episode has great material to work with. But the goodness is inherited, not created. There is also the matter of the show's frequent incorporation of the Silly Walks gag, in which Beast Boy and Cyborg taught Starfire about exaggerated physical comedy through absurd walking styles. This was a direct reference to the Ministry of Silly Walks, the Monty Python sketch that first aired on October 15, 1970, as part of Monty Python's Flying Circus. The sketch is one of the most famous in the history of British comedy and has been referenced by hundreds of subsequent productions. It reproduced the physical comedy of the original sketch with animated characters and treated the reproduction as the joke. If you knew the Monty Python original, you recognized it and perhaps smiled. If you did not, you saw characters walking strangely for no discernible reason. The comedy was, once again, contingent on prior knowledge rather than generated by the show's own creative work. The cumulative effect of all three registers, the physical comedy, the meta humor, and the referential comedy, was a show whose humor functioned like a collage. Each individual piece came from somewhere identifiable. The fart jokes came from the gross out tradition, the fourth wall breaks came from the meta comedy tradition, the pop culture references came from the Family Guy tradition. Assembled together, they created something that felt energetic and varied, but no single piece was original to Teen Titans Go. The show was a DJ, not a composer. It mixed other people's tracks with skill and energy, but it did not write the music. And this matters beyond the question of critical evaluation. It matters because the humor of a show is in many ways the show's voice. It is how the show talks to its audience. It is what distinguishes one comedy from another, what makes The Simpsons feel different from South Park, feel different from Bob's Burgers, feel different from Archer. When a show's humor is assembled entirely from borrowed components, the show does not have its own voice. It has a composite voice, a pastiche voice, a voice that sounds like a little bit of everything and a lot of nothing in particular. That voice can be enjoyed. It can generate laughs, but no one can point to it and say, that is the Teen Titans Go voice, the thing that only this show does. Because everything it does, some other show did first. The sixth way Teen Titans Go was never original, involves its relationship with the shows it replaced and the network strategy that sustained it. And here, the history gets complicated because Teen Titans Go did not just follow in the footsteps of the original 2003 Teen Titans. It also, in the eyes of many fans, replaced Young Justice, a critically acclaimed DC animated series that had been canceled by Cartoon Network in 2013, after 2 seasons and 46 episodes. Young Justice, developed by Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, was a serious, serialized show about young DC heroes operating as a covert operations team under the supervision of the Justice League. It featured complex plotting, character development that unfolded across multi-episode arcs, a tone that respected the intelligence of its audience, and an ensemble cast that included Robin, Aqualad, Kid Flash, Superboy, Miss Martian, and Artemis. The show earned strong critical reviews and developed a passionate fan base. It was canceled not because of poor viewership in absolute terms, but because of low toy sales, a metric that Cartoon Network used at the time to evaluate the commercial viability of its animated properties. The show, it turned out, had a significant female viewership that was not purchasing the action figures marketed primarily to boys. This gendered purchasing gap, rather than any deficiency in the show itself, determined its fate. When Cartoon Network dropped Young Justice and introduced Teen Titans Go just months later, the timing created an association that the network did not intend, but could not avoid. Fans perceived Teen Titans Go as a direct replacement for Young Justice, a sillier, cheaper, more commercially pliant show that had been substituted for a more ambitious one. The anger was genuine, and it was sustained over years. It was compounded by Teen Titans Go's subsequent dominance of Cartoon Network's programming schedule. By August 2014, the show was airing 6 times a day on weekdays, despite having only 29 half-hour episodes at the time. A little over a year later, the show would air 15 times a day. By June 2015, it was occupying at least 4 to 5 hours of daily airtime. In late 2014, half of Cartoon Network's airtime was divided between Teen Titans Go and The Amazing World of Gumball. Other shows were squeezed out. Sonic Boom and Transformers Robots in Disguise were pushed into graveyard slots, forced to premiere in time periods when viewership was at its lowest, so that Teen Titans Go reruns could air in prime time. Some series, including the then upcoming Be Cool, Scooby-Doo, and Wabbit, were moved off Cartoon Network entirely, relocated to the secondary network Boomerang, where their audience reach was a fraction of what it would have been on the main channel. Adventure Time, Regular Show, and Steven Universe, 3 of the most critically acclaimed animated series of the decade, were scheduled around Teen Titans Go, rather than the other way around. By the end of 2015, scheduling analysis showed that Teen Titans Go occupied approximately 64% of Cartoon Network's weekly airtime. Even SpongeBob SquarePants on Nickelodeon, a show with considerably higher ratings and a longer track record, rarely achieved that level of network favoritism. The dominance was so extreme that it became a subject of discussion, not just among fans, but within the animation industry itself. As creators on other Cartoon Network shows watched their work pushed to the margins of the schedule to make room for yet another rerun of a show that already had hundreds of episodes in rotation, this pattern of using a cheaper, higher volume show to dominate a network's schedule was not invented by Cartoon Network or by Teen Titans Go. It is a standard practice in children's television programming that dates back to the era of syndicated cartoons in the 1980s. Companies like DC Entertainment and Filmation would produce large quantities of episodes at low cost, specifically to fill broadcast hours on independent television stations. The economics are straightforward and have not changed in 40 years. A show that is cheap to produce and generates consistent, if not spectacular, ratings is more profitable in aggregate than a show that is expensive to produce and generates higher but less frequent viewership peaks. Teen Titans Go fit this model perfectly. Its flash animation kept per episode costs low. Its 11-minute episode format meant that each half-hour block contained 2 complete stories, doubling the effective episode count for scheduling purposes. Its lack of serialization meant that episodes could air in any order without confusing viewers, making schedule management trivially easy for network programmers. Its target demographic of young children meant that the same episodes could be re-aired repeatedly without audience fatigue, since young children notoriously enjoy repetition in a way that older audiences do not. And the show's creators were aware of the resentment their show generated among older fans. They addressed it directly and with evident amusement. Producer Michael Jelenic described the crossover episode with the Young Justice characters as one that reminded their Titans why everyone hated their show. The episode, Let's Get Serious, which saw the Teen Titans Go characters trying to become serious and crossing paths with the Young Justice crew, was deliberately designed to acknowledge the criticism. But acknowledging criticism is not the same as responding to it with original creative work. It is, in fact, the practice of a show incorporating its own backlash into its narratives has been a fixture of television since at least the 1990s. When The Simpsons began incorporating fan complaints into its scripts during what critics call the show's middle period, the pilot episode of Teen Titans Go brought in over 3 million viewers, and Cartoon Network renewed the show for a second season in June 2013, citing successful ratings. They confirmed that the combination of a familiar brand, a low production cost, and an aggressive scheduling approach could generate the viewership numbers that advertisers demanded. And once that confirmation was in hand, there was no incentive to change anything. The show continued to be produced at the same volume, in the same style, using the same techniques, for year after year after year. The production formula that had been established in the first season proved so durable that it required virtually no modification across the show's entire run. A viewer watching a Season 8 episode of Teen Titans Go would find the same animation style, the same character dynamics, the same comedic rhythms, the same reliance on parody and reference, and the same 11-minute episode structure that had defined the show in Season 1. Compare this with how other long-running animated comedies evolved over time. The Simpsons of 1990 looks and feels substantially different from The Simpsons of 2000, which looks and feels substantially different from The Simpsons of 2010. South Park's animation evolved from crude construction paper cutouts to sophisticated digital animation over the course of its first decade. Adventure Time began as a relatively straightforward adventure comedy and evolved into a show capable of episodes like I Remember You, which dealt with themes of memory loss, aging, and the dissolution of identity with a sophistication that would have been unimaginable in its first season. These shows changed because their creators grew, because their audiences grew, because the act of making something over a long period of time naturally leads to evolution if the creators are paying attention to what they are doing and why. Teen Titans Go did not evolve because evolution was not part of the design. The machine was built to produce a consistent output, and it did. By the time it surpassed Adventure Time's record of 274 episodes to become the longest-running show in Cartoon Network history, it had been on the air for nearly a decade, and its production formula had not changed in any meaningful way from its first season. The relationship between Teen Titans Go and the other shows on Cartoon Network's schedule during its period of dominance is worth examining more closely, because it illuminates a pattern that extends beyond any single show. In the years between 2013 and 2020, Cartoon Network aired some of the most inventive and critically acclaimed animated series in the history of the medium. Adventure Time, created by Pendleton Ward, explored themes of loss, identity, and the passage of time within a post-apocalyptic fantasy world. Steven Universe, created by Rebecca Sugar, told stories about trauma, healing, and queer identity with a depth and sensitivity that had rarely been seen in children's animation. Over the Garden Wall, created by Patrick McHale, was a miniseries that drew from American folk traditions and early 20th century animation to create something genuinely haunting. These shows existed alongside Teen Titans Go on the same network, and the contrast between them was instructive. They were original works that took creative risks and found audiences through the quality of their storytelling. Teen Titans Go was a commercial product that found its audience through scheduling dominance and brand recognition. Both approaches worked commercially, but only one of them produced original art. The network strategy that Teen Titans Go benefited from, the show it was perceived as replacing, and the way it handled the resulting controversy were all drawn from existing playbooks. Every element of the situation, the cancellation of a prestige show in favor of a commercial one, the scheduling dominance of the commercial show, the fan backlash and the show's meta response to that backlash, had played out before in the history of American television. The details changed. The pattern did not. The scheduling situation reached its apex in the period between late 2014 and mid-2016. During this window, a viewer turning on Cartoon Network at virtually any time of day was more likely to see Teen Titans Go than any other show. The network had, in effect, become the Teen Titans Go channel with occasional interruptions for other programming. The decision to scale back the show's airtime in May 2016 was itself an acknowledgement that the strategy had been pushed to its limit. But the damage, if damage is even the right word for a commercially successful strategy, had been done. An entire generation of Cartoon Network viewers had internalized the show's presence as the default state of the network. The show was not merely popular, it was omnipresent. And omnipresence, as any programmer knows, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The show that airs the most gets watched the most because it is always the show that is on when a viewer picks up the remote. The ratings that resulted from that omnipresence were then used to justify the omnipresence. The logic was circular, and it was borrowed from the same circular scheduling strategies that children's networks had been employing since the 1980s. The same pattern had occurred at Nickelodeon, when Ren and Stimpy, which had pushed the boundaries of what animated comedy could be, was eventually replaced by safer, more formulaic programming that generated higher advertising revenue with lower creative risk. It had occurred at ABC when the Disney-owned network shifted its Saturday morning lineup from original animation to cheaper live-action programming in the late 2000s. It had occurred at Fox when the network briefly canceled Family Guy in 2002, replacing it with programming that was less controversial and less expensive. The business logic is always the same. A show that generates consistent ratings at low cost is more valuable to a network than a show that generates higher ratings at higher cost, because the margin on the cheaper show is better. Teen Titans Go was a margin play. It always had been. And margin plays are not original, they are by definition the most conventional possible approach to programming, because convention is what minimizes risk. There is one more thing worth noting about the network dynamics, because it connects to the broader argument about originality. When Teen Titans Go dominated Cartoon Network's schedule, it was not just occupying airtime, it was shaping the expectations of an entire generation of viewers. Children who grew up watching Teen Titans Go in the mid-2010s, children who saw it airing 15 times a day absorbed its creative norms as the default. They learned that comedy meant pop culture references. They learned that characters meant exaggerated personality traits. They learned that animation meant flat, symbol-based flash production. They learned that storytelling meant 11-minute episodes with no continuity between them. These were not the only things they learned, of course. Many of these children also watched Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Gravity Falls and Over the Garden Wall, shows that taught them entirely different lessons about what animation could be. But Teen Titans Go was the loudest voice in the room, simply because it was on the most. And the lessons it taught were borrowed lessons packaged in borrowed formats, delivered through borrowed characters. There is something else worth noting about the show's relationship to the original Teen Titans, because it illuminates a broader truth about how the entertainment industry handles creative properties. The original 2003 series ended on an ambiguous note. The final episode, Things Change, raised questions about Terra's fate and about the nature of change itself that the show deliberately left unanswered. Fans debated the ending for years. They wrote fan fiction about it. They created artwork inspired by it. They argued in online forums about what the ending meant and whether the show would ever return to resolve the questions it had left hanging. That unresolved ending was, in a real sense, a gift to the audience. It invited them to continue thinking about the show, to continue engaging with its characters and themes, long after the final episode had aired. It treated the audience as active participants in the show's meaning, rather than passive consumers of content. When Teen Titans Go arrived, it did not continue that conversation. It did not resolve the questions, it did not acknowledge the ambiguity. It simply replaced the conversation with something else, entirely. Something that did not require active engagement from its audience. Something that could be consumed passively, without thought, without investment, without the kind of emotional participation that the original series had cultivated. The replacement was not hostile. It was not malicious. It was simply indifferent to what had come before, in the way that a factory is indifferent to the craftsman whose workshop it replaced. The distinction between Young Justice and Teen Titans Go is not merely a matter of taste or preference. It is a matter of creative ambition. Young Justice, in its 46 episodes, attempted to tell a coherent, evolving story about young heroes navigating a world of political intrigue, personal growth, and moral complexity. Teen Titans Go, in its 447 episodes, attempted to tell 447 self-contained jokes. Both approaches have their value, both can entertain their respective audiences, but one of them requires originality at a fundamental level, because a serialized story must continually invent new situations, new developments, new emotional territory for its characters to navigate. The other can sustain itself indefinitely through borrowed materials, because each episode is a fresh start that requires nothing more than a new combination of existing elements. The show's pilot brought in over 3 million viewers, and its ratings remained commercially viable throughout its run. But ratings measure attention, not quality. They measure how many people are watching, not what those people are experiencing. A show can be watched out of habit, out of availability, out of the simple fact that it is on the screen and nothing else. Teen Titans Go was, for many young viewers, the show that was always on, not because it was the best thing available, but because it was the most available thing. And availability, like longevity and success and popularity, is not originality. If you are still here, and your eyes are starting to feel heavy, that is fine. Let the words wash over you like a slow current. There is no urgency to any of this. The details will still be here tomorrow, and the night is long. The seventh way Teen Titans Go was never original concerns its narrative structure at the episode level. And this is the section that requires perhaps the most patience from you if you are still paying attention, or perhaps the least. If you are drifting towards sleep, because narrative structure is invisible. It is the skeleton beneath the skin, the frame beneath the canvas, the thing that holds everything together without being seen. Most viewers never think about it. They experience the story without analyzing how the story is built. But when you look at how Teen Titans Go constructed its episodes, what you find is a blueprint that was drawn by someone else decades ago and has been passed from show to show like a set of architectural plans that every builder in the neighborhood uses because nobody wants to pay for a custom design. And this is where the argument becomes granular, because the specific formula that Teen Titans Go uses for the majority of its non-parody episodes follows a template so well established in American animated comedy that it barely requires description. But describing it is precisely the point, because the familiarity of the template is itself the evidence. The formula is this. The episode opens with the Titans in their tower, engaged in some mundane domestic activity, watching television, eating food, arguing about something trivial. A conflict arises, usually from one character's personality flaw, creating friction with the others. Robin's obsessiveness, Cyborg's enthusiasm for something the others find annoying, Starfire's misunderstanding of a human custom, Raven's desire to be left alone. The conflict escalates through a series of increasingly absurd complications. The episode reaches a climax in which the absurdity peaks, often involving property destruction, a villain showing up, or the characters learning a lesson that they will immediately forget by the next episode. And then it resolves, usually by undoing whatever changes occurred during the episode and returning to the status quo. This is the standard sitcom structure, adapted for animation. It is the structure that the Flintstones borrowed from the Honeymooners in 1960, when Hanna-Barbera essentially transported Ralph and Ed from a Brooklyn apartment to a prehistoric subdivision. It is the structure that virtually every American animated sitcom has used since. It is the structure of Dexter's Laboratory, where the title character's scientific ambitions create a problem that escalates and then resolves. It is the structure of Johnny Bravo, where the title character's vanity creates a problem that escalates and then resolves. It is the structure of the Powerpuff Girls, where a villain's scheme creates a problem that the girls resolve with superpowers. It is the structure of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, where the characters' quirks generate conflicts that resolve within the episode's runtime. It is the structure of virtually every 11-minute animated comedy that has ever aired on Cartoon Network, and many that have aired elsewhere. The formula extends beyond the episode level to the scene level. Within each 11-minute episode, Teen Titans Go follows predictable patterns of scene construction that will be immediately familiar to anyone who has watched American animated comedies. A conversation in the living room, a training sequence that goes wrong, a trip to the store that spirals into chaos, a competition between the Titans that reveals their character flaws, a villain attacking Jump City, with the fight treated as an interruption to whatever mundane activity the Titans were engaged in, rather than as the central action of the episode. These scene types recur across hundreds of episodes, creating a rhythm that is comfortable and predictable and entirely borrowed from the conventions of the form. There is nothing inherently wrong with using an established structure. Most television does. The sonata form has been used by composers for 3 centuries, and individual sonatas can still be original within it. The 3-act structure has been the foundation of Western dramatic writing since Aristotle, and individual plays can still surprise within it. But Teen Titans Go does not just use the sitcom structure. It uses it without modification, without subversion, without any attempt to interrogate or reimagine the formula. The opening domestic scene, the personality-driven conflict, the escalation, the absurd climax, the reset, episode after episode, season after season, 447 times. Consider the first episode again. Legendary sandwich. Raven wants to watch Pretty Pegasus. She invents a quest to get them out of the tower, gathering ingredients for a mythical sandwich supposedly created by an ancient sandwich wizard for an ancient king. The ingredients are bacon, lettuce, and tomato. Cyborg goes for the bacon at the lava lake. Beast Boy seeks the lettuce deep underground. Starfire is assigned the tomato in deep space. Robin is given the humiliating task of picking up bread at the supermarket. Each Titan except Robin encounters a sandwich guardian. They return. They argue over who gets the first bite. Silky eats the sandwich. Status quo restored. This is not a revolutionary narrative structure. It is a quest narrative, one of the oldest story templates in human culture, compressed to 11 minutes. And played for laughs, it had been used thousands of times before April 23rd, 2013. Or consider Meatball Party, which premiered on July 30th, 2013. Cyborg fires a mystery meatball into Raven's mouth, cracking her tooth and releasing a demon octopus that lives inside her. The situation escalates. The demon devours Starfire. Raven yells at Cyborg. Complications ensue. The problem is resolved. Status quo restored. Or consider Money Grandma, the 4th episode of the 2nd season. An election for team leader leads Robin to become increasingly desperate in his campaigning. Raven summons George Washington from the past in the hope that he will teach Robin what a real leader looks like. Beast Boy, not recognizing Washington, calls him Money Grandma because of his appearance on the dollar bill. The situation spirals into absurdity. It resolves. Status quo restored. Or consider Smile Bones, in which the Titans eat so much food that their bellies develop faces and personalities of their own, leading to an internal conflict between the Titans and their own stomachs. The premise, the idea of a body part developing independent consciousness and creating problems for its owner, is a comedy trope that dates back to ancient theatrical traditions and was a recurring device in shows like The Ren and Stimpy Show, where internal organs regularly took on lives of their own. Or consider Matched, in which a love-matching algorithm pairs the Titans with unexpected romantic partners, a premise borrowed from the dating app culture of the 2010s and from the long tradition of romantic comedy mix-up episodes that stretches back through Three's Company and I Love Lucy to the earliest days of televised situational comedy. Or consider A Farce, the 12th episode of the 3rd season, in which Brother Blood takes the Titans to court for the reckless destruction they leave in their wake every time they save Jump City. The Brain serves as the judge, Monsieur Mala as the bailiff, Brother Blood as the prosecutor, and Robin as the defense attorney. The courtroom comedy is a genre that dates back to at least the 1950s on American television, with shows like Perry Mason establishing the template. By the time Teen Titans Go attempted it, the courtroom parody had been done by The Simpsons, by Seinfeld in its series finale, by Futurama, by Family Guy, and by dozens of other comedies across every medium. The episode title itself, A Farce, is an acknowledgement that the show was not treating the genre seriously. But not treating a genre seriously while still using its entire structure is not the same as transcending that genre. It is using it is borrowing it is taking a pre-built narrative framework off the shelf and putting your characters inside it. The same pattern repeats across the show's entire run. BBDAY, the 15th episode of the 3rd season, used the birthday episode format, one of the most common sitcom templates in existence. When the other Titans failed to celebrate Beast Boy's birthday, he began aging and de-aging uncontrollably, and the Titans had to throw him a party to stabilize him. The episode even included a joke about the cost of singing the Happy Birthday song, a reference to the copyright that had long restricted public performances of the melody. The birthday episode had been done by virtually every sitcom in the history of the format. Friends did it, Seinfeld did it, The Office did it, SpongeBob did it. Every show does the birthday episode, because birthdays are universal, and the emotional dynamics of a birthday, the expectation of being celebrated, the disappointment of being overlooked, the absurdity of party planning, are preloaded with comedic potential. Teen Titans Go's version was competent, but it was not original. You might be thinking at this point that the charge of formula applies to nearly every television show that has ever existed, and you would be right. Nearly every show uses a formula. The question is not whether a formula exists, but what a show does within it. The Simpsons, at its best, used the domestic sitcom formula as a container for social satire, philosophical inquiry, and emotional storytelling that consistently exceeded the expectations of the form. South Park used the same basic template: 4 boys in a small Colorado town encountering a problem and resolving it by the end of the episode, as a vehicle for some of the sharpest cultural commentary on American television. Even within children's animation, shows like Phineas and Ferb turned the formula into a feature, with the repetitive structure of each episode becoming a running joke that the show constantly played with and subverted. Teen Titans Go did not play with its formula, it did not subvert it did not comment on it except in its occasional meta episodes, which were themselves formulaic in their own way. It simply used it, reliably and without deviation, as a container for whatever borrowed material the episode happened to be deploying that week. The formula was not a starting point for invention. It was a template to be filled, and what filled it was, more often than not, material drawn from other sources. In the standard Teen Titans Go episode, the emotional arc follows a curve that will be immediately recognizable to anyone who has studied animated comedy. Low-stakes opening, escalation through absurdity, peak chaos, resolution through reversal or deus ex machina, return to baseline. There is no genuine emotional risk at any point. No character is ever truly in danger. No lesson is ever truly learned. The emotional flatness is a feature, not a bug, because it allows the show to reset completely between episodes, which in turn allows episodes to air in any order, which in turn allows the network to schedule them freely, which in turn maximizes the commercial value of the content. But emotional flatness is not an original creative choice. It is the default setting of episodic animated comedy, the factory preset that every show starts with and that the best shows deliberately override. The Simpsons overrode it with episodes like Lisa's Substitute and Mother Simpson. Futurama overrode it with Jurassic Park and The Luck of the Fryrish. Even SpongeBob SquarePants, hardly known for its emotional depth, overrode it with Gary Come Home and the series of episodes exploring SpongeBob's anxious relationship with his driving test. These moments of genuine feeling gave those shows a dimension that Teen Titans Go never attempted to develop, not because it could not, but because the formula did not require it. There is even a structural borrowing at the level of the individual joke that deserves mention, because it reveals how deeply the formula penetrates. The typical Teen Titans Go comedic beat the unit of humor from which larger sequences are constructed, follows a pattern that comedy writers call setup, escalation, absurd conclusion. A character states a premise. The premise is pushed to an extreme. The extreme produces a visual or verbal punchline that is funny because it exceeds expectations. This 3-beat structure is the fundamental unit of American animated comedy and has been since the golden age of Looney Tunes. Chuck Jones, Tex Avery, and the other directors of the Warner Bros. Cartoon Studio refined this structure in the 1940s and 1950s, and it has been the default comedic rhythm of virtually every American animated comedy produced since. Teen Titans Go uses it constantly, reliably, and without variation. The setups change, the escalations change, the absurd conclusions change. But the rhythm never does. It is the same rhythm that SpongeBob uses, the same rhythm that Fairly OddParents uses, the same rhythm that Dexter's Laboratory uses, the same rhythm that every 11-minute animated comedy on every children's network has used for 30 years. The show did not develop its own comedic timing. It inherited a comedic timing that had been standardized by an entire industry. The show does occasionally break from this formula, primarily in its whole plot reference episodes and in its multi-part specials. The Night Begins to Shine special, a 4-part story that aired in the summer of 2017 under the unwieldy title The Day the Night Stopped Beginning to Shine and Became Dark Even Though It Was the Day, substituted a 1980s-inspired adventure narrative for the usual domestic comedy. But even that departure followed its own borrowed template. The 1980s adventure aesthetic, complete with neon colors, synthesizer soundtracks, and muscular heroes had already been thoroughly explored by Stranger Things, which premiered on Netflix in July 2016, by Kung Fury, a 2015 short film that became a viral sensation, and by dozens of other 2010s era properties that traded on 1980s nostalgia. The Night Begins to Shine was a pastiche of a pastiche. The special did produce one genuinely interesting outcome, though it was not a narrative one. The song that gave it its name had been found by accident. Director Peter Mahale was working on a 2014 episode called Slumber Party when he came up 10 seconds short of the required runtime. He needed extra footage. He was scoring the episode with a 1980s vibe and, while browsing through music libraries, stumbled across a track called The Night Begins to Shine, performed by a group called BER, which stood for the initials of its 3 members, Carl Burnett, Franklin Ania, and William J. Reagan. The song had been written 40% by Burnett, 40% by Ania, and 20% by Reagan, the band's name itself an acronym formed from the first letters of their 3 surnames. The song had been originally co-written in 2005 and was produced between 2013 and 2014. As part of a commission to create an 80s-style track for a music library, Burnett was asked to create a song with an 80s vibe as part of his professional work. And after recording, the track was deposited into the Warner Brothers music library, where it sat in total obscurity, an unknown track by unknown musicians, waiting for someone to find it. Mahale used it to fill his 10-second gap. The song resonated with viewers. It was subsequently featured in the episode 40%, 40%, 20%, which became a fan favorite. Cartoon Network took notice and commissioned the 4-part special. The song was released commercially and peaked at number 23 on the Billboard Hot Rock and Alternative Songs chart. Fall Out Boy, CeeLo Green, and Puffy Amiyumi all recorded covers for the special. It was, by any measure, a genuinely unusual story. A forgotten song rescued from complete obscurity by a children's cartoon and turned into a modest commercial hit. But notice what the story reveals about the show's creative process. The song was not written for Teen Titans Go. It was not created by Teen Titans Go's creative team. It was not conceived as part of the show's artistic vision. It was found in a library, borrowed out of convenience, and repurposed because it happened to fit a 10-second gap. Even the show's most distinctive and celebrated musical moment was not its own. It was a happy accident built on someone else's work. This is, in miniature, the story of the show's entire relationship to creativity. The good things in Teen Titans Go were usually things that arrived from outside, things that were found rather than made. The voice cast was found in the 2003 series. The characters were found in DC Comics. The parody plots were found in the films and shows being parodied. The Night Begins to Shine was found in a music library. The show was an exceptionally efficient finder of things. It had an uncanny ability to locate existing material that could be repurposed, recombined, and repackaged for its specific format and audience. But finding is not creating. Curation is not composition. Assembly is not invention. You might argue that all art is, to some degree, assembly, that every creator draws from prior experience, prior works, prior traditions. That originality is a spectrum rather than a binary. And you would be right, but Teen Titans Go does not sit somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. It sits at the far end, where borrowing becomes the entire creative method, where the question is not what can we create, but what can we repurpose. Every episode began not with a blank page, but with a source, a film to parody, a genre to imitate, a format to borrow, a prior episode of the original series to remake. The blank page was never blank. It always already had someone else's words on it. The eighth way Teen Titans Go was never original involves the specific way it handled the most iconic element of the original series, its villain, and the broader question of how it engaged with the DC Comics mythology it had inherited. Slade Wilson, also known as Deathstroke, was the primary antagonist of the 2003 Teen Titans. Voiced by Ron Perlman, who brought a quiet menace to every line, Slade was a manipulative mastermind whose presence anchored the show's most serious storylines. His relationship with Robin, built on psychological warfare and a twisted form of mentorship, gave the original series much of its dramatic weight. Slade wanted Robin as an apprentice. Robin was horrified by the offer, but drawn to understanding his enemy. The dynamic between them was the backbone of 2 full seasons and provided some of the most memorable moments in the entire series. Teen Titans Go's treatment of Slade is instructive precisely because it reveals the show's default creative mode, turning inherited dramatic material into referential comedy. The character appeared sparingly in the new show, and when he did appear, his role was almost always subordinated to a meta joke, a pop culture reference, or a fourth wall gag. The most significant example is the 2018 theatrical film Teen Titans Go, to the movies, in which Slade served as the primary antagonist but was the subject of a running gag about his similarity to Deadpool, the Marvel Comics character. The joke worked because it was grounded in genuine comic book history. Deadpool was created by Rob Liefeld and Fabian Nicieza for Marvel Comics in 1991, and Liefeld has publicly acknowledged that Deathstroke was the primary inspiration for the character. The similarities are not subtle. Deathstroke's real name is Slade Wilson. Deadpool's real name is Wade Wilson. Their costumes share obvious visual parallels. Their skill sets as mercenaries and master combatants overlap significantly. In the film, the Teen Titans repeatedly mistake Slade for Deadpool, and Slade becomes increasingly frustrated, at one point noting that he was created first. Ryan Reynolds, who plays Deadpool in the live-action films, publicly responded to the joke on social media. Multiple critics described the film as a PG-rated Deadpool. GameSpot titled its review Deadpool for Kids. The comparison was not incidental. It was the structural basis of the film's entire comedic approach. The movie took the fourth wall breaking, genre satirizing, self-referential comedy that had made the Deadpool films commercially successful and adapted it for a younger audience. The Deadpool formula itself, the hero who knows he is in a movie, who mocks the conventions of his own genre, who addresses the audience directly, who treats the fourth wall as a swinging door, was borrowed from older traditions. Deadpool's fourth wall breaking in the comics drew from characters like She-Hulk, who began breaking the fourth wall in her Marvel Comics series in the 1980s, and Ambush Bug, who did the same in DC Comics during the same decade. The Deadpool film's meta-comedy drew from the Mel Brooks tradition of genre parody, from the mockumentary style pioneered by Christopher Guest, and from the increasingly self-aware superhero narratives of the 2010. So the chain of borrowing runs deep. Teen Titans Go borrowed its treatment of Slade from the Deadpool films, which borrowed their comedic approach from earlier meta-comedies, which borrowed their techniques from even earlier satirical traditions. At no point in this chain did Teen Titans Go contribute an original element. It received and passed along. There is something poignant about this particular chain of borrowing because it involves a character who was himself borrowed. Deadpool was created as a parody of Deathstroke, which means that Teen Titans Go's movie was making jokes about a character who was already a joke about the character the show had inherited from the 2003 series. The borrowing was recursive. It folded back on itself, the show was referencing a reference of the thing it was already referencing, and somewhere inside all those layers of reference, the original character, Slade Wilson, as Ron Perlman had voiced him in the 2003 series, the quiet, menacing, psychologically complex antagonist, who had driven 2 full seasons of compelling drama, had been reduced to a running gag about the name similarity between 2 comic book mercenaries. That reduction is a microcosm of everything Teen Titans Go did to the material it inherited. It took things that had weight and substance and turned them into jokes. And the jokes worked, but the weight was gone. The film itself opened on July 27, 2018, following a premiere at the TCL Chinese Theater on July 22. It earned $52.1 million worldwide on a budget of $10 million, making it a clear commercial success. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a certified fresh rating of 91% based on 132 reviews, with an average rating of 7.25 out of 10. Critics praised the film's energy, its relentless pace, and its willingness to mock the conventions of the superhero genre. But the humor it was praised for was Deadpool's humor, transplanted into a children's film. Multiple critics made the comparison explicitly. GameSpot titled its review, Deadpool for Kids. Comic-Converse called it precisely that. The comparison was not incidental or unfair. It was descriptive. The film took the fourth wall breaking, genre satirizing framework that had made the Deadpool films commercially successful, and adapted it, beat for beat, for an audience that was not old enough to see the R-rated originals. One reviewer noted that the film went further than Deadpool in some respects, because while Deadpool told a fundamentally linear story that threw out references along the way, Teen Titans Go! To the movies made the meta-narrative about superhero movies literally the plot. But it also demonstrated that the film's primary innovation was not in the creation of new comedic material, but in the more thorough application of someone else's comedic approach. The energy it was praised for was the energy of parody, which by definition derives its vitality from whatever it is parodying. Beyond the film, the show's broader engagement with DC Comics mythology followed the same pattern of inheritance without invention. Justice League members appeared throughout the series, but always in service of comedy rather than narrative. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and other major DC characters showed up as guest stars, as judges in competition episodes, as foils for the Titans' incompetence. The two-part episode called, appropriately, Two-Parter had each of the Titans dress up as a Justice League member. Cyborg as Green Lantern, Robin as Batman, Starfire as the Flash, Raven as Wonder Woman, and Beast Boy as Martian Manhunter. Batman appeared alongside Superman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, and the Flash as prisoners of Darkseid. In the theatrical film, Nicolas Cage voiced Superman, Halsey voiced Wonder Woman, Lil Yachty voiced Jon Stewart, and Jimmy Kimmel voiced Batman. These were celebrity casting choices designed to generate publicity, not creative decisions designed to serve the characters. And then there is the Employee of the Month situation. The original 2003 Teen Titans had an episode called Employee of the Month, in which Beast Boy investigated the disappearance of cows while working at a fast food restaurant called Mega Meaty Meat to earn money for a moped. In 2017, Teen Titans Go! Produced an episode called Employee of the Month, Redux. It was explicitly and by design a remake. Many scenes were reproduced from the original, numerous lines of dialogue were reused verbatim from the 2003 version. The plot was functionally identical, though some scenes were cut to fit the shorter runtime, including sequences of Beast Boy trying other jobs before landing at Mega Meaty Meat. The show's own documentation describes it as the only episode to have been directly remade from the original series. The remake was thorough enough that fans compiled side-by-side comparisons of specific scenes, documenting how closely the new version hewed to the original, Beast Boy's transformation sequence, the restaurant setting, the revelation about the missing cows. Even specific camera angles and compositions were reproduced with only minor modifications to accommodate the different animation style and shorter runtime. The moped that Beast Boy covets remains central to both versions, though in the Teen Titans Go! Version it was given the ability to fly, a minor embellishment that did not alter the fundamental structure of the story. The restaurant owner, Meaty, was redesigned with a different body type and without the glasses worn by his 2003 counterpart, but his narrative function remained identical. The UFOs belonging to the villain No-Fu were changed from flying saucers to cube shapes, a cosmetic alteration that did not change the plot in any meaningful way. When the Titans used a decoy cow to infiltrate the villain's operation, all 5 of them hid inside it in the new version, compared to only Cyborg in the original. A minor logistical change that served the broader comedy of the new show's ensemble approach. This is borrowing that does not even attempt to disguise itself. It announces itself in the title. The word Redux, which means brought back or revived, is an explicit acknowledgement that what you are about to watch is something you have already watched, recycled, and repackaged with a different animation style and a slightly different comedic sensibility. It is, in microcosm, the entire creative philosophy of Teen Titans Go! Take what exists, change the wrapper, present it again. The show's broader treatment of the DC universe followed the same pattern. Every villain who appeared in Teen Titans Go! Was inherited from the DC Comics source material and from the 2003 series. Slade, Brother Blood, Trigon, the HIV-E, 5, Control Freak, Mad Mod, Cinderblock, Plasmus, Overload, all of them were pre-existing characters whose designs, personalities, and narrative functions had been established by other creators in other works. Teen Titans Go did not create a single original villain of lasting significance. It repurposed the existing villain roster, reducing each antagonist from a narrative threat to a comedic prop. Trigon, who in the original series was a world-ending demonic entity whose presence drove an entire season of existential dread, became a bumbling father figure who showed up at the tower to embarrass his daughter. The comedy worked, but it worked because the audience remembered what Trigon had been in the original. Without that memory, without the prior characterization that the 2003 series had provided, the joke would have had no foundation. The humor derived not from anything Teen Titans Go had created, but from the gap between what Trigon had been and what he had become. That gap was the joke, and the gap belonged to someone else's work. This pattern extended to every villain in the show's roster. Jinx, Gizmo, and Mammoth, the core members of the HIV-E5, were all inherited from the 2003 series and from the DC Comics source material. Mad Mod, the 1960s obsessed British villain, was a character created by Bob Haney and Nick Carty in the original Teen Titans comic books in 1966. Control Freak, the pop culture obsessed antagonist who became one of the most frequently appearing villains in Teen Titans Go, was created for the 2003 animated series. In the new show, Control Freak served as a stand-in for the audience, a character whose obsessive knowledge of media and popular culture mirrored the referential nature of the show itself. But even that meta-commentary, the idea of a villain who represents the audience's own relationship to media, was borrowed from prior works. The Simpsons comic book guy had been performing the same function since the early 1990s. The same principle applied to the show's use of the broader DC mythology. When Batman appeared, the humor came from the audience knowing who Batman was, what he represented, and how incongruous it was to see him interacting with the slapstick world of Teen Titans Go. When Superman appeared, the comedy drew on the audience's pre-existing relationship with the character. When the Justice League showed up as judges in competition episodes, the joke was a juxtaposition of their grandeur with the Titans' absurdity. None of these comedic effects were generated by Teen Titans Go's own creative work. They were generated by the decades of storytelling that DC Comics, the DC Animated Universe, and the broader superhero media landscape had already done. Teen Titans Go was consuming cultural capital that other creators had accumulated over the course of 80 years of superhero storytelling. When Batman appeared, the laughter came from what the audience already knew about Batman, not from anything the show had provided. The two-parter episode, named with characteristic bluntness, had each of the Titans dress up as a Justice League member. Cyborg became Green Lantern, Robin became Batman, Starfire became the Flash, Raven became Wonder Woman, Beast Boy became Martian Manhunter. The episode featured Batman alongside Superman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, and the Flash as prisoners of Darkseid. The comedy derived entirely from the incongruity between the Titans and the Justice League characters they were impersonating. That incongruity was itself borrowed cultural capital. It only worked because the audience had pre-existing associations with both sets of characters. Associations built by decades of DC Comics storytelling, by the DC Animated Universe, by the Christopher Reeve films, by Tim Burton's Batman, by the Christopher Nolan trilogy, by the Zack Snyder films, by the Justice League animated series, by a vast and interconnected web of media that had nothing to do with Teen Titans Go. The show consumed that web. It fed on the cultural associations that other creators had built over the course of 80 years, and it contributed nothing back to that web. It took and did not give. It consumed and did not produce. The Robin-Batman dynamic in Teen Titans Go deserves separate attention because it represents perhaps the clearest example of the show drawing its comedy from pre-existing mythology rather than creating its own. Robin's insecurity about his relationship with Batman, his desperate need for Batman's approval, his resentment of the other members of the Bat family, these were all themes that had been explored in DC Comics for decades. The idea of Robin as the underappreciated sidekick, constantly living in Batman's shadow, had been a fixture of comic book storytelling since at least the 1980s, when Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns reimagined the Batman-Robin relationship as fundamentally dysfunctional. Teen Titans Go took this well-established dynamic and amplified it to comedic extremes, with Robin frequently dressing up as Batman, claiming to be Batman's favorite, and displaying jealous rage when other heroes received Batman's attention. The comedy worked because the underlying tension was real, because decades of Batman comics had established the emotional foundation on which the jokes were built. But the foundation was not Teen Titans Go's work. It was DC's work, accumulated across thousands of comic book issues spanning nearly a century. The ninth way Teen Titans Go was never original, involves a pattern that runs through the show's engagement with its own audience and its critics. Over the course of its long run, the show developed a distinct category of episodes that fans and critics came to call hater episodes. These were installments specifically designed to address, mock, dismiss, or respond to the criticism that Teen Titans Go received from fans of the original 2003 series and from the broader animation community who felt that the show was unworthy of the Teen Titans name. The first of these was Let's Get Serious, which aired on October 16, 2014, as the 32nd episode of the second season. In this episode, the characters from Young Justice confronted the Teen Titans Go versions of the heroes and criticized them for being too silly, too juvenile, too unworthy of the superhero tradition they claimed to represent. The episode's premise was revealing in its specificity. The HIVE villains attacked, and while the Teen Titans Go heroes stumbled through a slapstick response, the Young Justice characters arrived and dispatched the threat with the kind of efficient, serious heroism that the original show had been known for. Aqualad, voiced in the Young Justice series by Kari Payton, who also voices Cyborg in both Teen Titans iterations, essentially broke the fourth wall to deliver the exact complaints that real fans had been posting online for over a year. The scene was so precisely calibrated to the actual criticism that producers Michael Jelenic and Aaron Horvath later acknowledged the connection directly. When asked about the episode's origins, Jelenic explained that they were on a tight deadline for a script and turned to their haters for inspiration, taking the criticism from vocal people on the internet and embracing it. A significant portion of the show's most vocal critics, he noted, happened to be Young Justice fans because Teen Titans Go occupied the opposite end of the spectrum from what Young Justice had been. Aqualad essentially articulated, word for word, the complaints that real fans had been making online since the show's premiere. That Teen Titans Go lacked the seriousness, the depth, the character development, and the quality of the shows it had replaced. The episode's resolution had the Teen Titans Go characters attempting to become serious and failing spectacularly, implying that their silliness was their identity and that critics needed to accept it or move on. The idea came together naturally, according to producer Michael Jelenic, who said it was largely inspired by complaints that Cartoon Network should have made a more serious show. The second hater episode was The Fourth Wall, which aired as the 9th episode of the 3rd season on August 20th, 2015. In this episode, the villain Control Freak revealed that the Titans existed on a television show that he had created. The Titans walked up to the metaphorical fourth wall and called the viewers creeps for watching their personal business. The episode proceeded to mock various aspects of the show's own production, including its animation quality, its humor, its acting, and its storylines. It was, in essence, a preemptive strike against criticism. By mocking itself, the show attempted to diffuse the ability of critics to mock it effectively. The third was The Return of Slade, which aired on October 1st, 2015. Despite the title promising the return of the original series' most iconic and most feared villain, Slade did not appear in the episode at all. The episode opened with Robin alerting the team that Slade had returned, and the Titans went out to face him. But the battle was never shown on screen. Instead, the episode focused on Beast Boy and Cyborg wanting a clown, and it contained an embedded message about cartoons being for children and about adult fans needing to respect the child demographic rather than demanding that children's entertainment cater to their preferences. The episode was universally panned. Critics, fans of the 2003 series, and even fans of Teen Titans Go itself called it the worst episode in the show's history. It was described as false advertising, as a deliberate insult to the fan base of the original series, and as a bait and switch that used a beloved character's name to attract viewers only to deliver something completely unrelated. The episode caused the series to lose a significant number of older viewers who had been willing to give it a chance. Notice the timing of these episodes. Let's Get Serious aired on October 16th, 2014. The Fourth Wall aired on August 20th, 2015. The Return of Slade aired on October 1st, 2015. 3 of the show's 5 major hater episodes aired within a 13-month window between October 2014 and November 2015. This was not a coincidence. This was the period during which the backlash against Teen Titans Go was at its most intense, fueled by the show's increasing dominance of Cartoon Network's schedule and by the growing perception that it had replaced Young Justice and the original Teen Titans in the cultural landscape. The show's creative team was clearly aware of the criticism and was responding to it in real time, turning the backlash into content at a pace that suggests it was a deliberate editorial strategy rather than an organic creative impulse. The fourth hater episode was Wall-E T, which aired on November 19th, 2015. This episode had an unusual origin. It was originally created for William Walter Thompson, a child from the Make-A-Wish Foundation who loved Teen Titans Go. Thompson voiced himself in the original version of the episode, but Cartoon Network refused to air the episode with Thompson's voice performance, reportedly because he was not a member of the production crew and the network had policies about outside voice contributions. Tara Strong was brought in to re-record his lines at the last minute. The episode featured extensive, self-deprecating humor. The characters acknowledged that the show was widely considered a failure. Beast Boy and Cyborg laughed that Robin did not know about Wall-E T, calling him a number one. Fan of the Teen Titans, while Robin stated that everyone now called the Teen Titans an abomination. Beast Boy acknowledged that Wall-E T was the only person who did not think of them as a complete failure. The self-deprecation was played for comedy, but the underlying message was defensive. The show knew it was hated and it was going to laugh about it rather than change. And the fifth, in a sense the culmination of the entire pattern, was Nostalgia is Not a Substitute for an Actual Story, which aired as part of the fifth season. The Titans time-traveled back to the 1980s to determine whether it was the best decade ever. The episode's title and opening premise both directly mocked Stranger Things and similar media for capitalizing on 1980s nostalgia, instead of developing compelling original stories. The title itself was a thesis statement that relying on the aesthetic and cultural associations of a previous era is not the same as creating something new. The irony is almost too perfect to require commentary, but it demands it anyway. Teen Titans Go, a show built entirely from borrowed characters, borrowed settings, borrowed plot structures, borrowed humor techniques, and borrowed animation methods, produced an episode whose title explicitly criticized other media for substituting nostalgia for originality. The show that had made its entire career out of referencing, parodying, and recycling the work of others aired a title card that said, in effect, referencing the past is not the same as creating something new. If there is a more succinct demonstration of a lack of self-awareness in the history of American animation, it has not been documented. A better illustration of the principle could not be written on purpose. The hater episode is not a genre that Teen Titans Go invented. The practice of a show responding to its critics within its own narrative has a long history. The Simpsons included meta-commentary about its own declining quality as early as the mid-1990s. South Park has made entire episodes about the criticism it receives, most notably in its 200th and 201st episodes. Seinfeld's series finale put the characters on trial for the personality traits that had defined the show for 9 seasons. A meta-commentary on whether the audience had been laughing with the characters or at them. Curb Your Enthusiasm made Larry David's inability to accept criticism a running theme across 11 seasons. But there is a crucial difference between how those shows handled criticism and how Teen Titans Go handled it. The Simpsons and South Park used meta-commentary as a platform for genuine self-examination, however, comedically framed. Their hater episodes contained real insights about the creative process, about the relationship between artists and audiences, about the inevitable tension between commercial success and artistic ambition. Teen Titans Go's hater episodes used meta-commentary as a defense mechanism rather than a tool for self-examination. The message across multiple episodes was the same. The critics are wrong, the show is what it is, and anyone who does not like it should simply stop watching. This is not an argument. It is a dismissal, and even the dismissal was borrowed. The strategy of preempting criticism by incorporating it into the show's own narrative, of turning hate into content, of making the backlash part of the brand, has been used by mediocre creative work throughout the history of entertainment. The irony again is structural. Teen Titans Go responded to accusations of unoriginality with a series of episodes whose format, structure, rhetorical strategy, and meta-narrative approach were all borrowed from other shows that had done the same thing before and done it better. Consider how this compares with a show that genuinely reckoned with its own criticism. South Park, across its long run, has produced multiple episodes that directly engage with criticisms of the show. The 200th and 201st episodes, which dealt with the show's treatment of religious figures and the question of what could and could not be depicted on television, were genuine engagements with real creative and ethical questions. The show did not merely acknowledge that people were angry. It explored why they were angry, whether their anger was justified, and what the implications of that anger were for creative expression in a post-9/11 media environment. The episodes were controversial, censored by Comedy Central, and ultimately became part of a larger conversation about the limits of satire. They were, in other words, original responses to criticism, responses that generated new ideas and new arguments rather than simply recycling the criticism as content. Teen Titans Go's hater episodes never approached that level of engagement. They acknowledged the criticism, mocked it, and moved on. The mocking was a response. There was nothing beneath it. There is one more dimension to the hater episode phenomenon that deserves examination, because it reveals something about the show's relationship not just to its critics, but to the idea of criticism itself. When Teen Titans Go made episodes about how everyone hated the show, it was engaging in a practice that psychologists call preemptive self-deprecation, the strategy of criticizing yourself before others can criticize you, thereby neutralizing the criticism by demonstrating that you are already aware of it. This is not a creative strategy, it is a social strategy. It is the strategy of the class clown who makes fun of his own appearance before the bully can. It works in the sense that it takes the weapon out of the critic's hand, but it does not address the substance of the criticism. It merely acknowledges the criticism's existence and moves on. The return of Slade deserves particular scrutiny because of the scale of the backlash it generated. The episode was universally panned not just by critics of the show, but by people who had been willing to give the show a chance. Fans of the original 2003 series, who had been holding out hope that the show might eventually acknowledge the dramatic potential of its inherited villain roster, saw the bait and switch as a deliberate insult. The episode used the most iconic villain in the franchise's animated history as clickbait, promising his return in the title and then delivering something entirely unrelated. The embedded message that cartoons are for children and that adult fans need to accept this rather than demanding that children's entertainment cater to their preferences was received not as a philosophical argument, but as a dismissal. The episode cost the show a significant portion of the older viewers who had been watching out of loyalty to the original series and the original characters. Those viewers did not come back. They did not need to. The show's ratings among its target demographic of children 6 to 11 remained strong regardless, which was precisely the point. The hater episodes were never designed to win over critics. They were designed to convert criticism into content, to transform negative attention into 11 minutes of programming that could be slotted into the schedule alongside everything else. And that is what Teen Titans Go consistently did. It acknowledged that people thought the show was unoriginal, unfunny, unworthy of the Teen Titans name. It built episodes around that acknowledgement. It turned the backlash into content. But at no point did it respond to the criticism by actually becoming more original. The hater episodes did not lead to a creative reinvention. They did not spark a new direction for the show. They were processed, converted into 11-minute segments, aired, and forgotten. The next episode after a hater episode was invariably another standard formula episode with another standard formula structure. The criticism had been absorbed, digested, and excreted, and the show continued exactly as it had before. This is the most revealing thing about Teen Titans Go's engagement with its own criticism. The show was capable of hearing the criticism. It was capable of articulating the criticism more clearly than some of its critics could. It was capable of building entire episodes around the criticism, but it was not capable of, or perhaps not interested in, actually changing in response to the criticism. The machine continued to run, the borrowed parts continued to turn, and the episodes continued to air 15 times a day on a schedule that had no room for reinvention and no incentive to attempt it. Anyone hoping for change was hoping for something the machine was not designed to provide. For anyone drifting in and out, that is perfectly all right. That is what this is for. The rhythm of the words should carry even when the specific details blur. There's no need to remember every episode title or every date. The shape of the argument is all that matters, and the shape is simple. Everything was borrowed, everything. And if you have been here a while and this is the kind of content that keeps you company on nights like this, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure there is more of it waiting for you. It costs nothing, and it makes the difference between this channel growing and this channel going quiet. The 10th and final way Teen Titans Go was never original is, in some respects, the most important, because it concerns not any specific element of the show, but the show's entire reason for existing. Every creative decision discussed in the previous 9 sections, the inherited characters, the flanderized personalities, the flash animation, the whole plot references, the borrowed humor, the network strategy, the sitcom formula, the recycled villain, the defensive meta episodes, all of these individual choices were products of a single underlying reality. Teen Titans Go was created to fill a programming need. It was not created to tell a story. It was not created to explore characters. It was not created to push the boundaries of animation as a medium. It was created because Cartoon Network needed a specific kind of product, a high-volume, low-cost, comedy-oriented show that could appeal to a young demographic, air in large quantities, and sustain ratings across an extended broadcast schedule. These were the parameters, these were the constraints. And if you understand these constraints, you understand the show. Because these constraints, not any creative vision, determined what the show became. This is not speculation, it is observable in every production choice the show made. The 11-minute episode format was chosen because it allowed 2 episodes per half-hour block, maximizing the number of discrete stories that could air in any given week. The Flash animation was chosen because it minimized per-episode production costs, allowing the show to maintain a volume of output that would have been impossible with traditional animation. The lack of serialization was chosen because it allowed episodes to air in any order without confusing viewers, simplifying scheduling for network programmers and enabling the aggressive rerun strategy that would eventually see the show airing 15 times a day. The reliance on parody and whole plot references was at least in part a response to the need to produce 52 episodes per season across most of the show's run, a volume that makes purely original storytelling extremely difficult to sustain even for the most talented writing staff. None of these choices are unique to Teen Titans Go. They are the standard choices of industrial children's television production, and they have been made by every show that has occupied a similar position in a network's lineup for the past 4 decades. The show's commercial viability was demonstrated in ways that had nothing to do with creative merit and everything to do with availability and scheduling. During the January 2016 United States blizzard, Teen Titans Go was one of only 3 television properties that contributed to a record-setting 1.3 million simultaneous Xfinity on-demand viewings. That statistic does not reflect quality. It reflects the fact that millions of children were trapped indoors by a snowstorm, and the show was the most readily available thing on their screens. Availability, not artistry, drove the number. The show was there, the children were there. The viewing happened, and the viewing was counted, and the count justified the continued production of more episodes, which would be aired more times, which would generate more viewings, which would justify more production. The cycle was self-sustaining, and nothing about it required originality at any point. SpongeBob SquarePants, which premiered in 1999 and has run for over 300 episodes across 14 seasons, uses the same 11-minute format and the same domestic conflict escalation resolution structure. Fairly Odd Parents, which ran from 2001 to 2017, used the same formula-driven approach to episode writing. Dexter's Laboratory, which ran from 1996 to 2003, used the same template of a character's defining trait, creating a problem that escalates and then resolves. Even earlier, shows like Scooby-Doo and Tom and Jerry and the Flintstones used rigid formulaic structures that allowed for high-volume production with minimal creative risk. What distinguishes some of those shows from Teen Titans Go is not the formula. They all use the same formula. What distinguishes them is the degree to which they brought original elements to the formula, elements that existed independently of the template and gave the show a reason to exist beyond filling airtime. SpongeBob SquarePants, created by marine biologist Steven Hillenburg, had an original setting that drew from Hillenburg's genuine knowledge of marine life, an understanding of underwater ecosystems that informed the show's world building in ways both obvious and subtle. It had an original aesthetic sensibility rooted in Hillenburg's love of surrealist art, particularly the work of the Belgian painter James Ensor. It had characters that, while they operated within the sitcom formula, possessed personalities and relationships that felt specific to the show, rather than imported from somewhere else. Dexter's Laboratory, created by Genndy Tartakovsky, had a visual style influenced by Soviet-era animation and a comedic sensibility that drew from Eastern European absurdist traditions, giving it a flavor that was unmistakable even at its most formulaic. Fairly Odd Parents, created by Butch Hartman, had a premise built around a specific childhood fantasy, the wish fulfillment concept, that gave it a narrative engine distinct from other shows, one that generated its own unique complications and conflicts. Teen Titans Go had no equivalent original element. Its characters were borrowed from DC Comics and the 2003 series. Its setting, Titans Tower in Jump City, was borrowed from the same source. Its animation style was the industry default for its era. Its humor was a compilation of techniques developed and refined by other shows over the course of decades. Its narrative structure was the standard sitcom template that had been in continuous use since the Flintstones. Its parody episodes were built on the plots of other properties. Its meta episodes used strategies pioneered by other self-aware comedies. Its response to criticism followed the playbook established by shows that had faced similar backlash before it. Every component came from somewhere else. None of it was grown in the show's own soil. There is one final comparison worth making because it illustrates the difference between a show that uses familiar elements as a starting point and a show that uses them as the entire destination. In 2023, Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelenic, the developers of Teen Titans Go, co-directed the Super Mario Bros. Movie for Illumination and Universal Pictures. The film was based on the most famous video game franchise in history. Its characters, its settings, its music, its visual iconography, all of it was borrowed from Nintendo's intellectual property, just as Teen Titans Go had borrowed from DC's. The film earned over $1 billion worldwide, and it received criticism that was strikingly similar to the criticism that Teen Titans Go had received, that it was a crowd-pleasing commercial product that substituted brand recognition for creative depth, that it relied on its audience's nostalgia and familiarity with the source material rather than building something new on top of it. The parallel is worth noting because it suggests that the creative approach that defined Teen Titans Go was not an accident of the show's circumstances, but a genuine artistic philosophy held by its creators. Horvath and Jelenic appear to believe, based on the evidence of their work, that the best use of existing intellectual property is to package it in the most commercially efficient format possible, to serve the audience what it already knows and wants, rather than challenging it with something unfamiliar. This is a legitimate commercial philosophy. It generates enormous revenue, but it is, by definition, a philosophy that precludes originality. The commercial imperative was the show's genome. It determined the shape of every cell, the function of every organ, the behavior of every system. You can trace any creative decision the show made back to the commercial imperative and find a clear, direct, unbroken line of causation. The characters were borrowed because borrowing is cheaper and less risky than creating. The animation was Flash-based because Flash is cheaper and faster than traditional animation. The episodes were 11 minutes because 11-minute episodes maximize scheduling flexibility. The plots were borrowed because borrowed plots reduce the creative labor required per episode. The humor was referential because referential humor requires less original invention than structural comedy. The show acknowledged its critics because the acknowledgement itself generated additional content without requiring additional creative investment. Every single choice, traced to its origin, leads back to the same root. What is the most efficient way to produce the maximum amount of commercially viable content at the minimum possible cost? This does not mean the show lacked craftsmanship. That distinction matters. Individual episodes contain clever jokes, well-timed visual gags, and genuine moments of comedic invention at the micro level, even if the macro structure was borrowed. The voice cast, performing together for more than 2 decades across both the original series and Teen Titans Go, developed a chemistry and a shorthand that elevated material that might otherwise have felt rote. You can hear it in the timing between Scott Menville and Greg Sibes, in the way Tara Strong can shift Raven from deadpan to genuine emotion in a single line. In Kari Payton's ability to make Cyborg's enthusiasm feel organic even when the script around it is formulaic. The Night Begins to Shine arc demonstrated that the show's creative team was capable of sustained narrative ambition when given the opportunity and the mandate to try something bigger. The show's sheer longevity, its ability to sustain itself across more than a decade, and 9 seasons and 447 episodes and a theatrical film, and multiple specials, is a testament to the discipline of its production pipeline, even if that pipeline was optimized for volume rather than innovation. But craftsmanship and originality are different things. They are related qualities, and they often appear together, but they are not the same quality, and the presence of one does not guarantee the presence of the other. A team can be exceptionally good at assembling borrowed parts. They can take those parts and fit them together with precision and care. They can polish the joints until they are invisible. They can paint the surface until it gleams. And the result can be entertaining. It can be beloved. It can generate 447 episodes and a movie that earns 5 times its budget. It can become the longest running show in the history of its network, surpassing Adventure Time's record of 274 episodes. But it is not original. A cover band can perform with tremendous skill. A tribute act can capture the spirit of the original performers with remarkable fidelity. The musicians in a cover band may be individually as talented as the artists whose songs they play, but no one confuses a cover band with the artist who wrote the songs. No one walks away from a cover band performance saying that they have just heard new music. The performance may have been excellent, the execution may have been flawless, but the music belonged to someone else. Teen Titans Go is, at its core, a cover band. It performed the hits of the original Teen Titans, the hits of classic cinema, the hits of other animated comedies, the hits of the meta-comedy genre, and it performed them with energy, with professionalism, with the evident enjoyment of a cast that genuinely liked working together, and with the unmistakable advantage of performers who had been honing their craft for 2 decades. But it did not write its own songs. Not one, not ever. And that is not a failure exactly. It is a choice, a commercial choice made for commercial reasons, executed with commercial competence. Teen Titans Go gave Cartoon Network exactly what Cartoon Network wanted. A reliable, high-volume, low-cost show that could dominate a schedule and sustain ratings. No one can dispute the commercial achievement. The numbers speak clearly and they speak loudly. The commercial logic is worth examining in its own right because it illuminates why the show was structured the way it was. Cartoon Network, like all advertising-supported television networks, generates revenue by selling commercial time. The price of that commercial time is determined by the size and demographic composition of the audience watching it. Children between the ages of 6 and 11 are one of the most valuable demographics in advertising because they influence household purchasing decisions and because they develop brand loyalties that can persist for decades. A show that consistently delivers that demographic in large numbers is, from the network's perspective, the most valuable kind of programming it can air, regardless of its critical reception or its place in the artistic canon of animation. Teen Titans Go delivered that demographic with remarkable consistency. Its ratings among children 6 to 11 were strong enough to justify the scheduling dominance that the show received. And the cost of producing each episode, kept low by the Flash animation pipeline and the 11-minute format, meant that the margin between production cost and advertising revenue was substantial. This is not an original business model. It is the same model that Hanna-Barbera used in the 1960s when it flooded the Saturday morning airwaves with cheaply produced cartoons that served as vehicles for toy advertising. It is the same model that DC Entertainment used in the 1980s when it produced shows like Inspector Gadget and The Real Ghostbusters, specifically to sell merchandise. It is the same model that has governed children's television since the medium's earliest days. Teen Titans Go applied this model with precision and discipline, but it did not invent it. The model was as borrowed as everything else. But longevity is not originality. Success is not originality. Popularity is not originality. An enormously successful enterprise can be built out of entirely borrowed materials, and Teen Titans Go is the proof. Step back and look at the show as a whole. All 447 episodes, the theatrical film, the crossover specials, the musical episodes, the parodies and the pastiches and the references, and the remakes. What emerges, not a creative work in the traditional sense, what emerges is an aggregation, a compilation, a carefully assembled collage of elements that were developed by other creators, in other shows, in other decades, in other media, and brought together under a single brand name with enough energy and volume to sustain a programming block for over a decade. The characters came from DC Comics. In the 2003 series, the animation came from the Flash toolkit that the industry had standardized. The humor came from Family Guy, from South Park, from Animaniacs, from Ren and Stimpy, from SpongeBob, from Chowder, from Flapjack, from every animated comedy that had preceded it on the same network. The episode structures came from the sitcom tradition that dates back to the Honeymooners. The parody templates came from the films and shows being parodied. The meta-comedy came from Community and The Simpsons and Seinfeld and Freakazoid and Animaniacs. The response to criticism came from the playbooks of every self-aware comedy that had preceded it. The villain treatment came from Deadpool. The musical moments came from songs that were found in libraries rather than written for the show. The animation was outsourced to Canadian studios using the same software and techniques that half the industry was already using. Every piece of the machine came from somewhere else. Every gear was manufactured by someone else. Every bolt was threaded by someone else's hand. Teen Titans Go assembled the machine, and the machine ran. And it ran for a long time, and it ran efficiently, and it entertained millions of children, and it made a great deal of money for Warner Brothers and Cartoon Network and everyone involved in its production. But it was never original. Not in the first episode, not in the 400th, not in its theatrical film, not in its crossover specials, not in its musical numbers, not in its hater episodes, not in a single frame of its Flash animated 11-minute, formula-driven, parody-dependent, commercially optimized existence. And maybe that is fine. Maybe originality is overrated as a metric for evaluating entertainment. Maybe a show that makes children laugh, that keeps them company on long afternoons, that provides a familiar and comforting presence in a world that can feel chaotic and unpredictable. Does not need to be original. Maybe the assembled machine, built entirely from borrowed parts, is valuable precisely because the parts are familiar, because the audience does not need to learn a new language to enjoy it, because the jokes land without effort, because the characters feel known without introduction, because the whole thing slides into your brain like a key into a lock that has been turned 1,000 times before, smooth and frictionless and easy. Maybe. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the show has been watched with children or younger siblings or students, and the joy it brings them is real. And the thought arises, this is enough. This does not need to be anything more than what it is. That is a respectable position. But if that is the argument, then let it be made honestly. Let it be made without pretending that Teen Titans Go was something it was not. Let it be made with full acknowledgement that every creative choice the show made had been made before by someone else, somewhere else, in some other show that took the risk of going first. Because going first is what originality means. The intuition is universal. It means being the one who does it before anyone else does. It means creating something that cannot be traced back to a prior source that exists because someone imagined it, rather than because someone remembered it. It means making something never seen before, something that surprises, something that changes how people think about what the medium can do. It means looking at a blank page and filling it with something that has never been written, rather than transcribing what someone else wrote in a different hand. And Teen Titans Go, for all its energy, for all its commercial success, for all its 447 episodes, and its decade-plus run, and its theatrical film, and its place in the record books, never once went first. It followed every time in every way, from beginning to end, and now it is quiet. The room is dark, or perhaps it is getting there. The light from your screen is the only light left, maybe, or perhaps there is a lamp somewhere, or the blue glow of something electronic across the room. Your breathing has slowed, or maybe it has not. Maybe you are still wide awake and thinking about all of this. Either way is fine. Either way is the right way to be here. There is nothing else to prove. The case has been made 10 ways. Each one documented, each one traceable. Each one built on facts that you can verify yourself if you choose to. Episode titles and air dates and production credits and character descriptions and box office numbers and Billboard chart positions, all of it checkable, all of it real. Or you can simply trust the shape of the argument and let the specifics blur into the background. The conclusion is simple enough to carry into sleep. Or you can let it go, you can let the details sink into the background and just feel the weight of the argument, which is simple even if the evidence is long. Everything was borrowed, everything was assembled. Nothing was invented. The market demands a show that can air 15 times a day without you noticing that you have seen the same episode 3 times that week. Teen Titans Go gave the market what it wanted, and the market rewarded it, and the critics complained, and the show made episodes about the critics. And the critics complained about those episodes, and the show made more episodes about the complaints about the episodes. And the cycle continued season after season until eventually the arguments grew tired and the show simply continued. Undisturbed, filling its allotted hours on the schedule, performing its borrowed material with the easy confidence of a machine that knows exactly what it is and has no ambition to be anything else. It is what it is, it was what it was never anything else. There is a thought experiment that clarifies the distinction. Imagine that the entire history of 2 animation had been erased, that every show that ever aired had been forgotten, and that someone discovered a single episode of Teen Titans Go in a vault somewhere with no context, no prior knowledge, no reference points. Would that episode make sense? Would the humor land? Would the characters feel like fully realized individuals with inner lives and motivations? The answer, for the vast majority of episodes, is no. The humor would fall flat because the references would be unrecognizable. The characters would feel thin because their depth was stored in another show, in the 2003 series, not in this one. The parody episodes would be incomprehensible because there would be nothing to parody against. The meta episodes would have no target. The whole plot references would be just plots, stripped of the comedic energy that came from the audience recognizing where the plot had been taken from. The show, removed from its web of references and borrowings, would be a shell, a beautifully colored, professionally voice-acted, competently assembled shell. But a shell nonetheless. Now perform the same thought experiment with the original 2003 Teen Titans. Would that show make sense in a vacuum? Largely, yes. The characters have internal lives, the stories have stakes, the emotional arcs would register even without knowledge of the DC Comics mythology they were drawn from, the animation would still be striking, the show would lose some of its resonance without the broader context, but it would retain its core identity, because its core identity was something it had built for itself rather than borrowed from others. And maybe that is the final thought to carry with you as the night settles in. Not anger, not disappointment, not the frustrated wish that Teen Titans Go had been something different. Just the quiet recognition of what it was, a machine built from borrowed parts. A show assembled from the work of others. A long, loud, commercially successful demonstration of the principle that originality is not required for survival. That a show can run for over a decade without ever producing a single element that could not be traced back to something that came before it. The original Teen Titans, the 2003 series that started all of this, ran for 65 episodes across 5 seasons. It was canceled, and it left behind a legacy that people still argue about, still care about, still remember with genuine fondness. It was not a perfect show. No show is, but it was original in ways that mattered. Its animation was original, its tone was original, its approach to its characters was original. It took risks, some of those risks did not pay off, but the ones that did created something that no other show could have created, because no other show had the same combination of influences, ambitions, and creative personalities working together at the same time. Teen Titans Go ran for 447 episodes across 9 seasons and counting. It is still on the air. A 10th season has been announced. It will probably produce another 52 episodes, and those episodes will probably follow the same formula, use the same animation, borrow the same plots, reference the same movies, and deploy the same humor that the show has been using since April 23rd, 2013. Because that is what the machine does. It runs, it does not change. It does not need to change. It does not want to change. It was built to do one thing, and it does that one thing with remarkable consistency and zero deviation. 447 episodes. Not one of them original. Sleep well if that is where you are headed. Think well if you are still thinking. And if you want to hear this kind of thing again, the next one starts with you being here. That is all it takes. Just being here. I will see you in the next one.